Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
I appreciate you too.
Appreciate you, brother. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm like really inspired by your movement here. You know,
Thanks.
You're making a nice transition from your firefighter career to, all the things that you've been passionate about, and you're getting to speak with people who you've been following and reading and studying their work.
Dude, it's fun.
And you get to meet them.
Totally.
You know?
It's honestly a dream come true. So it's
Awesome.
a hobby, really.
Right.
But yeah, we're using technology now. I'm talking to people from all over the world, and it's people I've been reading for a long time. So this is an honor to share their message. And anyway, I've gotten to know you over the years. I met you in 2018 because I came back from the jungle. That's the only reason I know that, in 2018. And Howard was about to move in.
That's right.
And I remember coming to your house, your backyard, and I forget who connected us, but they said, go to Mike's house. He's doing breathwork and all that too. And so, yeah, we connected and immediately hit it off. Jesse as well. And yeah, I just respect you as a man, as a friend. And I thought it'd be cool to explore consciousness together again, but record it and share it because we always go pretty deep together.
Oh, yeah.
So,
always. Yeah, I remember the last time we were in the backyard, we probably talked for about 3 hours.
Very easy. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And it's rare to find people that, I think we were talking earlier, just you have a good integrated boots on the ground, but you're able to explore consciousness and you're spiritually oriented. But you're actually of service and you're trying to help people and you're a provider and you're a man that I respect. So I've always liked that about you. You're not like off in the clouds and trying to transcend to the 15th dimension type thing and talking about all this stuff. You're actually doing the work, which I appreciate. So
appreciate that.
Yeah, and I don't know
I do my best.
I don't know your full story. I know you were a rescue diver in the Navy, right? At one point.
Yeah, I was aviation warfare. So the Navy has a program called aviation warfare. Essentially, there's like two elements you can do. You can go the helicopter route, or you can go P3 Orions, or actually there's shipboard personnel as well. And so it's kind of an arm of aviation. It's kind of an arm of intelligence in a way, because our main mission was to hunt and track submarines from the sky. And so P3 Orions have the ability to cover a lot of airspace, of course, because it's a plane, and they drop sonobuoys, and they can help look for submarines and coordinate with ships and all that kind of stuff. Submarines are very, very difficult to find, of course. Mm-hmm. There's nuclear, there's diesel. And then they have a helicopter arm, which I want to say started back in like the 1950s or 60s or so. And I knew some of the original guys who are actually part of that mission. They were some of my instructors when I was coming up. And so aviation warfare is a combination of hunting submarines. There's also a combat element to it, because as a helicopter crewman, you have the ability to deliver, SEAL teams and stuff like that into different areas. You also have the ability to do, first aid. So any sort of medevacs, anybody gets hurt on a ship or something like that needs to get transferred to a hospital. So we were first responders.
Cool.
So because I was going the helicopter route, and that's what I signed up for, part of that mission is going through U.S. Navy's helicopter search and rescue school, which is learning how to be a first responder. And so everything from, medical training to over land, over water, and basically being the first person on scene to get them out of a bad situation, being able to sustain them in flight so that you get to the hospital and then pass them off to the doctors.
That's amazing.
So that was really good training. But we also did a lot of other things. We did combat. And so that was like a special tier of training that we had to do, learning how to be door gunners, learning about missile systems, because we carried Hellfire missiles. And just getting prepared for missions where our role and our responsibility was, if a fighter plane got knocked out of the sky, or they had to eject, and now they're in some sort of hostile territory, how do we as a U.S. Navy group, also in conjunction with the Army, Air Force, Marine Corps, how do we put together a package to be able to get 2 helicopters into that area undetected, to find the pilot, which is difficult, and then get them out of hostile territory back to
Amazing.
safety. So we would practice that quite a bit.
Mm.
And then we would do these things called strip alerts, where basically we would be available for any sort of crash. Helicopter crashes over land, hostile territory. Plane crashes over land, hostile territory.
Wow.
Even if a soldier, got broken up from the group, or a SEAL team did, like, we would be able to work with the SEAL teams to be able to go in there and find people.
It's
And so we were
incredible.
trained and we learned that job, which was super high speed and
Mm-hmm.
very exciting. But a lot of my early training was how to hunt and track submarines from the sky. We had sonar systems, sonobuoys, we carried torpedoes. And so we were like the main line of defense for aircraft carriers. And so aircraft carriers, just think of it as like the mothership. And when the mothership goes out, it has about 80 planes, about 5,500 personnel.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's other ships that protect that aircraft carrier, because it's basically a floating airport.
Jeez.
And you have the ability to kind of take the fight, to any country
Mm-hmm.
through air and through sea. And so you would have a combination of destroyers and frigates and other ships that were assigned to the battle group. And so we would support the battle group. I would land on different ships, and sometimes I would ferry our admiral to different ships so they can speak with the captain of those ships, because he was in charge of the entire battle group, not just the aircraft carrier.
Damn.
Sometimes we had a submarine assigned to us, so they'd basically be doing their work underneath the ocean. And so when we go out on deployment, we go out like full force.
That's amazing.
So part of it is like show of force. Hey, the Navy's in our backyard right now. We got to be careful, because basically they can intervene at any time.
Right.
And also we would do open ocean rescue, because there's shipping containers, obviously traveling back and forth, traveling with goods. Some of them have good intentions, some of them doing shady stuff, some of
Mm-hmm.
them are smuggling drugs or people or anything like that. So we would do those types of missions as well. And then people fall off of ships. Storms come. It's the middle of the Pacific Ocean. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
rough weather. So we would be on call to basically support anybody lost at sea. Doesn't matter if it's U.S. or foreign. We would help
Hmm.
people out, which was really rewarding. And obviously, in a wartime situation, depending on who we were fighting with, we can be anti-submarine, depending if that was a threat to the battle group, and obviously be part of those missions. We could support Navy SEALs with any sort of mission or intelligence gathering that they had to do. So we would support those missions. We would replenish the ship, because when you have 5,500 people and 80 planes, you need lots of materials,
Mm-hmm.
you need gasoline, you need weapons, you need food. And so we would do missions called VertRep, where we would literally take our helicopters with the big hanging, you ever see the cargo hook and the
Yeah.
big hanging goods there?
Yeah.
And we would literally pick up materials and then transport them to the carrier. And all day long, we were just like
Wow.
transporting equipment. And those were really cool and fun flights. I missed those. What else would we were Uber for pretty much the admiral or news stations who are coming out to film.
Wow.
So we would do a lot of transportation, medvacs, which obviously you're well known with being a firefighter. So we were first responder trained. So we were like the jack of all trades.
Yeah.
We
It
got to do
sounds
a
like
little
it.
bit of everything.
It's
And it
amazing.
was awesome. And we got the opportunity to stay in shape and work out and do pool training. And as you know, like, I do a lot of the pool training here locally now.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a great opportunity to travel, fly on
Yeah.
the ship. We were flying 7 days a week, so I got tons of flight hours, nighttime, daytime flights, wartime flights, non-wartime flights. We would get to see all these other countries on our transit from San Diego to the Middle East. So we
It's
would
cool.
stop in different places, Japan, Guam. I've been to Iwo Jima.
Wow.
Who gets to go there?
Yeah. No
I've been to
kidding.
Midway.
Crazy,
I've been to
man.
Tinian, and that's the small island where they launched the plane that dropped the nuclear bomb.
Yeah.
And so that, like, all these like interesting islands, they have a lot of history in World War II, because the Japanese had basically conquered them, and then we kind of fought our way back.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was watching that movie, The Pacific, the other day.
Yeah.
I seen it years ago, but I revisited it recently, and I'm like, oh, I've been to that island. I've been to that
It's
island.
amazing.
All these famous islands where there was these wars. So I got to see a lot of places that you traditionally wouldn't go on vacation.
Right.
I got to see places that just nobody gets to go to.
Yeah. What a
And that
window.
was, a very interesting window. And when you're in a helicopter, you get the best window. You're at about 150 feet, in the air. You have the sliding door that opens,
Yeah.
and you get to see everything. And you're landing in the most remote places.
Yeah.
And you're getting to see part of the planet that most people just never get to see.
It's amazing,
And so it
man.
was a really cool experience.
Yeah. What a chapter. How
Yeah.
long was that chapter of your life?
99 to the end of '04. I
Okay.
finished my career in '04, and I was on inactive reserves for a while as well. And I went through training in '99, and then in 2000, I got assigned to my squadron, when I got done with all my training. And then shortly after, they sent us to Fallon, Nevada. We would spend usually about 2 months a year in Fallon, Nevada. And that's where the Navy Top Gun School is. And so that's where the Navy does all of their combat training. All the aviation
Cool.
does combat training. So you have F-18 Hornets. At the time, we had Tomcats. You'd have Navy SEAL teams in and out of there doing their own training. And then you would work with all of these different platforms to simulate wartime experiences. So we would go out into the desert and shoot tanks with
Crazy.
Hellfire missiles. We had F-18s flying over, dropping bombs,
Damn.
in simulated situations.
Mm.
We had these training camps where literally they would pretend that it was an embassy, and they'd have a bunch of people in character, and they were like really good actors,
Wow.
and in character who were taking over the embassy. And then we would have to kind of strategize as a team and come up with a plan, like how do we get these Americans out of this embassy safely? Meanwhile, there's people protesting along the walls, and they're
Wow.
armed, and there's danger. And so we would land our helicopters in, and we would be shooting blanks, and like creating these doing the very best that we can to kind of simulate what
Yeah.
we might be in store for in the future.
It's
And so
wild.
I got to do all of this very difficult training and just learn so much along the way.
Yeah.
Not necessarily being prepared for that, but just kind of doing all of these missions to prepare. And
Right.
it was just amazing training for my nervous system, for my mind, my ability to like make decisions without having all the information needed.
Mm-hmm.
And something that's really common in the military is learning how to adapt and overcome, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was really important lesson for me to learn as a young man. On life has so many different scenarios and variables to everything that we do, whether it's wartime or whether it's in everyday work.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with you guys in the fire department. It's like learning how to improvise, adapt, and overcome in all
Mm-hmm.
situations. So having contingency plans, planning, not necessarily having all the answers, but we're still going to move forward. We're still going to learn in flight,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're going to debrief. And then every flight, we're going to get better and better. And so I
Amazing.
was able to take that knowledge and really apply it to my civilian career when I got out. And it's been a
Yeah.
blessing.
It's amazing. And I know that eventually I'd like to hear how it led to your healing journey, which led to where you're at now, where you have a whole company and business around helping people, transform their own health and lives. But I'm curious how you even ended up into the field of doing what you just did, like being like what was your programming and what was your family life like? What was it like being a young man that led you to even do something like that?
So I grew up in Queens, New York. I was born and raised stereotypical Italian American family. My dad was a bus driver. We had four siblings. So it was four of us in the household. My mom was like a stay-at-home mom, kind of a
Mm-hmm.
PTA mom. She was like, just supporting the kids and taking care of us. And dad was working. Very, very, very humble beginnings.
Mm-hmm.
We lived in a great neighborhood in Ozone Park, Queens. That's where I was born. Shout out to 94th Street. And we just had this beautiful, like, 80s life where kids would be playing in the street and running around and playing wiffle ball. And
Mm-hmm.
we knew the neighbors, and the neighbors knew us, and everyone kept an eye out for the kids in the neighborhood. And we'd have block parties. And this is during the 80s. So,
Yeah.
this was like John Gotti time.
Yeah.
John Gotti was like well known in our neighborhood because he was part of, the mafia. The mafia controlled a lot of Queens and New York and all the boroughs at the time. And it was just an interesting like part of culture, like New
Mm-hmm.
York City culture in the 1980s. A lot was happening during Reagan and all that. But we had like a significant like break in our family, I think in like 1986 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was young, and my dad left. And so then my mom was left to basically take care of all four of us on her own. And my dad was like trying to figure himself out. And so he was, he had met another woman and all that kind of stuff. And so it was really hard on my mom emotionally, physically, financially. And so we had to really figure things out.
Yeah.
And so part of my journey really started there because, if mom's working 1 to 2 jobs trying to put food on the table, my dad was a bit absent at that time. He came around later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we had to really fend for our own. We had to take care of each other. We had to walk to school. We had to, take the bus. We had to just do all the things that we can do, make meals when we could, because a lot of times mom was working, but she was doing her best. But she had
Yeah.
to really step into that masculine role
Yeah.
and now put on work pants, which she wasn't used to doing.
Yeah.
And so that was like a ripple effect through our whole family, and it created a lot of problems and divide.
Mm.
And I was just a young kid, just trying to like figure things out and not quite sure what was going on or how to process it really. And that was my upbringing, mainly very stereotypical New York City life. As I started to get older, I kind of was like a subject of like a fatherless home.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I started to push the limits, push the boundaries. The problem is I was growing up in a neighborhood at the time. We had moved eventually to College Point, Queens, which is like the north side of Queens. It's right before you get to the Bronx. So basically, you have College Point, Whitestone, Bayside,
Mm.
and then there's a bridge takes you to the South Bronx. And the neighborhood was filled with a wide variety of different people. You had drug dealers, like guys who were trying to become mobsters or guys who were already mobsters in that area. You had Puerto Rican gangs, Dominican gangs, African American gangs, Chinese gangs, because there was a lot of Chinese culture there in Flushing Main Street area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was kind of influenced a lot by the people in my neighborhood, of course, because when you're a young buck and you're coming up, you kind of have to prove yourself. So you would get involved in, whatever was going on in the neighborhood, fighting, drug use, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I grew up really fast. So by the time I was 13, I was kind of already hanging out, I would say, with the wrong people. And I was idolizing the wrong people. I didn't have good mentorship.
Right.
And that was probably my biggest problem was, I was looking at the guys who were, muscular and had fancy cars and pretty girlfriends and,
Mm.
people had good street credit. And so people like were intimidated by them. And those were the guys that were hanging out in the park with us. And we were the young bucks coming up. And so they would kind of take us under their wing.
Yeah.
And so then I started to kind of get in trouble throughout my teenage years and not take my studying and those types of things. I was a little bit lost. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. And I'm skipping a bunch of beats here, but
Mm-hmm.
there's a time period where I was 20 and I hit like one of a handful of rock bottoms that I had in my life where I really was on the road to nowhere, in the sense that I had really no direction, I had no passion, I had no mentorship, and I believe I was really falling behind. And I was in a bar on like a Wednesday afternoon one day, and my buddy was the bartender, and I was drinking. And these two Navy recruiters came into the office or came into the bar to get lunch because they serve food there too. And they're kind of like, like, what are you doing? Like, you should be working, you're 20 years old.
Yeah.
And I was working at the time. I was kind of working like a night job, doing catering and bartending and stuff like that, but no direction. And so they kind of planted the seed of like, why don't you consider the U.S. Armed Forces?
Mm-hmm.
And it never really was on my mind. I always respected the military community. I always grew up watching movies and very much interested in all that. But ultimately, I took their request seriously, and I decided to, just see, like in New York City, everything is like blue collar, very blue collar
Yeah.
living in Queens. And so people usually go into the unions, become construction workers, they go police route, they go firefighter route,
Mm-hmm.
they get some sort of city job of some kind, good pension, good benefits. And so my whole family was always like pushing,
Yeah.
go get a good job with good pension and good benefits and good medical and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was doing some community college, but once again, like not really serious about like what I wanted to do, really no direction, which is super common for people at 20 years old.
Sure.
But I decided, well, why don't I just go and see what the Navy has to offer? You know, maybe I can go to the Navy, like learn a trade, learn a skill, go to their school systems, travel and be part of the Navy in a sense, and then
Mm-hmm.
get out and then maybe go work at an airport and fix planes or work on engines and all that kind of stuff. I was very much interested in like building things at the time. I was relatively handy. I liked working on cars and motors and engines.
Mm.
So I was thinking that I was going to go in the Navy, learn how to work on aircraft, maybe go get a job for like American Airlines or something like that, or work for the airport when I got out, and then have a good, stable career, get married, have kids, and just live that life.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my intention going in. Was really career focused and school focused. And I wasn't a great student when I was in high school because I was misguided a little bit. But the Navy was something that just fell on my lap, and I decided to take the test. And when I took the test, some options came up, and one of the options was this job called aviation warfare system operator. I'm like, what is that? That looks
Mm.
interesting. And they also put the other jobs on the table, which I could have been an aircraft mechanic. I could have worked on hydraulics. I could have been an electrician.
Mm-hmm.
I had scored high enough to be able to get some of the jobs that seemed interesting, but aviation warfare systems operator. And at the time, the guy was like, have you ever seen the movie Hunt for Red October? And that was like a movie that was popular, I think, in the 80s. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I've seen it. It was a super cool movie. He goes, well, that's what you'll be doing. You'll literally be able to fly in helicopters and track submarines. And they're like, those guys have super cool job, well respected in the Navy. They get to wear flight suits. They get to do cool stuff. They get to travel. It just seemed really exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to be a rescue swimmer.
Cool.
I'm like, oh, that's going to be badass. And so I took that really seriously. I talked to my mom about it. She really like kind of gave me the push, like go and do it, because she saw that there were just some things that she couldn't give me. You know, I was
Yeah.
now a man at this
Mm-hmm.
time. She's still like trying to make ends meet. And she realized that there was a threshold for her, like, you know, like for you to grow and go past like where you currently are now, you
Mm-hmm.
need like some sort of schooling training. And so she just wanted me to go and
Yeah.
just go and give it a shot.
Yeah.
So I decided to do it. But what I didn't realize was that when I signed up, I didn't sign up to be a rescue swimmer. I didn't realize that aviation warfare system operator could be P3 Orion planes. It could be living and working on a ship, tracking submarines from the ship, which they also do, like kind of command and control, or it could be helicopters. So when I got out of basic training, which during basic training, you have to get a lot of extra physical fitness work because
Mm-hmm.
they're preparing you for rescue swimmer school. And most people aren't cut out for that school and they have a high failure rate.
Right.
So we would have to go to the pool and do other things that people were not doing in basic training at the time. And I did well. I wasn't the top of my class. I wasn't the bottom of the class. I was right in the middle.
Yeah.
And I was with some star athletes, you know, people from all over the country that were professional swimmers. One guy was like a lifeguard in California. Another guy was like all state, you know, for his in Georgia for swimming, top of his class. And so I
Nice.
was pretty intimidated because growing up, I was not a professional swimmer. I'd never been on a swim team.
Mm.
I never did. I never even learned how to swim correctly, actually.
Yeah.
I just was leisure swimmer. I would go to the beach and I'd go in the pool.
Sure.
And
That's intimidating.
oh, it was super intimidating. I was like, oh my God, like I'm not going to be able to cut it here.
Yeah.
Like, how am I going to compete with these guys? But once they put the fins on and all the gear and I just like had good work ethic. And I think that's one thing that's great about New York City is that people from New York are really hard workers.
Yeah.
And so I had good work ethic. And so I showed up every day and I put in the work and I learned and I listened and I kept my mouth shut.
Mm.
And so the instructors tend to like me.
Yeah.
And so
get special time and like a not
Yeah,
attention, but
yeah, it just created less tension.
mm,
I didn't have a ton of ego. I was just like just trying to figure it out. And
mm,
when you build this bond with your classmates, the last thing you want is for them to move on and go to the next school because they've passed the first school and you be left behind,
mm-hmm.
or get moved out of the program and now you have to pick another job that's
Yeah.
like not as attractive.
And they wanted you to succeed, all your guys, and
Yeah, my
yeah.
friends did, because we all had plans like, oh, we're gonna finish the next school and then we're gonna go out to San Diego together and we're gonna have fun, and we had
Mm-hmm.
different options, and so mainly that was my driving force.
Cool.
My driving force was just like stay part of the pack,
Yeah.
keep up with the pack, get through the schools, and get to a place where I can actually do the job. And so I was building up all this confidence for every school that the Navy sent me through.
Mm,
Just built more and more and more confidence.
cool.
And an aviation school, it's a warfare school. It's a lot of math.
Yeah.
It was a
Wow.
ton of math, and I was like really taken back by that. And we had to study in rooms that were with locks and vaults, and all of our books had to be shredded after we read them, and all kinds
Wow.
of stuff, because it's all secret material. And so I started to get exposed to a world that I've only watched on TV.
Mm,
And so it was really interesting to be part of the world of, having a secret clearance and all that
right.
kind of stuff. And it was just a really exciting time in my life. I was networking and making friends with all these people from around the country. I was like literally this Queens kid, and now I'm hanging out with kids from Alabama and Georgia and Texas and
Mm,
Midwest. And it's just different exposure, different cultures.
yeah.
And so I learned a lot just from learning about the culture of the United States, which United States is one big country, but like every pocket of the country really has different culture.
Yeah.
And so that was really fascinating for me, even though I lived in a place or came from a place with tons of culture.
Sure.
Everyone from all over the world is moving to New York.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was just a great experience. But what I learned was, after I finished air crew school, which is really basically water survival school, they were ready to send me to aviation warfare school, and I was going to skip rescue swimmer school.
Mm,
And I was like, wait, all my friends are going to rescue swimmer school. Like, why am I not going? Like,
yeah.
why are you sending me to this other school? Like, I'm supposed to go to that one after.
Yeah.
They're like, no, you're not a rescue swimmer. It's not in your contract.
Mm,
And so I kind of like, escalated the situation, and I brought it up to this instructor who liked me, and I had decent rapport with him. He's like, let's take you in the office and let's see what we can do. He brought me into this guy's office, Master Chief Decenzo or something like that. I forget his name now, but he was like this tough, like Master Chief, been in the Navy many years,
mm,
and he was well known in the community, and he was well respected. And he brought me in the office, and he basically explained the situation. And that guy was like, you want to be a rescue swimmer? Why? And he asked me why. And so, I gave my response. And then he says, okay, go get your shorts and your t-shirt and put on your sneakers. And we're going to do a physical fitness in test for rescue swimmer school. If you pass it, I will sign you into rescue swimmer school immediately. If not, like, you're out.
that's amazing. Yeah.
And so sure enough, I put on my shorts and sneakers. I went to the pool. They had me do a run, mile and a half run, push-ups, sit-ups, I think pull-ups maybe, and then a timed swim.
Mm,
And I passed. And sure enough, they put me in a rescue swimmer school, and that's when I got the opportunity to become a U.S. Navy rescue swimmer after passing that school.
wow.
And then sure enough, I find out that Master Chief was actually in the movie Hunt for Red October.
Wow.
There's a famous scene
Mm,
where Alec Baldwin is getting brought down to the submarine to go speak with that Navy captain about, the whole situation that was going on with Russia. And
mm-hmm.
the guy that's in the door was in the movie, and he was the one lowering Alec Baldwin down. So he
Dang.
was like kind of
Yeah.
famous in the rescue swimmer community for that. And
Cool.
yeah, that's how my career started.
That's amazing. I'm curious what your spiritual relationship, if any, was growing up. Did you have any kind of programming, or what was your relationship to what we would call God or spirit, or did you have belief systems? Or I'm curious.
I was raised in an Italian American family, so mainly it's Catholic.
Yeah.
And so I was raised Catholic. And so I was baptized. I went through communion. I went through confirmation. I did all the things. I actually spent my freshman year in Holy Cross High School. So I actually was in a 1 year of all boys Catholic high school. And then after that, I transferred to public school. My mom just couldn't afford it.
Mm.
And so I just finished the rest of my time in public school. Um, so I had the religious framework, but I did not consider myself really spiritual because I wasn't doing anything about it. I wasn't going to church on my own.
Mm-hmm.
I would pray on occasion. I wasn't meditating. My relationship with God was fuzzy. It wasn't like I didn't believe in God or I didn't believe in Jesus. I just wasn't putting any energy into
Yeah.
that. It was just something like I had to do as a young man
Yep.
because like that's just what everyone else was doing. Um, but I had like really no strong relationship with
Yeah.
spirituality or God at that time at all.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's sort of how mine was, and I like to think about that because some of the driving features of your life, which you're pretty spiritual now, to some degree in a different way, which we'll get into. But
Right.
I'm like, what was your upbringing? Because a lot of times it's hard to unpack a lot of that stuff, and it can be its own form of what you would call trauma. I hate to overuse that word, but it takes some courage and work to unpack a lot of indoctrination sometimes. But if it's not too heavy and it's a little lighter, it can be a little bit easier. So.
Yeah, when I would go to church, I typically would go to church during funerals or weddings. And so very rarely were we going to Sunday service. So I didn't really know how to make a connection with God. I always saw, the church as being like I wasn't having a spiritual
Experience.
experience at church. I was just like reciting, some of the prayers and songs,
Mm-hmm.
um, going through the motions, not understanding the history, the origin, or like how they came up with this process,
Mm-hmm.
not understanding what the smoke was that they're bringing through the church, not
Mm-hmm.
understanding the power of the organs,
Yeah.
because they had those old school organs, which is super cool. You still see them in some churches in New York City. Um, I never felt great going to church. Like I never left feeling like, oh, I'm super refreshed and like I'm on point now. I never felt bad. It was just very neutral about it.
Yeah.
But I wasn't putting any energy into spirituality. And I believe now at this stage of my life, that's really important to be balanced mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah.
And so it's like you have to kind of put eggs in all those baskets. And that was just a basket I was putting no eggs into. I just wasn't putting any energy into. I wasn't researching. I wasn't studying. I wasn't learning. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
trying to deepen my connection with God at that time at all. And that
Yeah.
that came much later.
That's interesting. Yeah, and then I know you and I have both found John Sarno's work, and I'd love to get into some of your healing, modalities and how you transformed your own mind and body, because that's huge. And now you actually help a lot of people do that, and it's a big part of your mission. And I'd love to hear what happened. You had a pretty bad injury, and then you had to go through the medical model, and I'd love to hear a little bit of how you found the medical model not to be working for you.
So this weird thing happened. I went through basic training, and when you go through basic training, you part of your training is learning, the basic standards of U.S. Navy rank system, all that kind of stuff. How to talk, how to operate, how to do formations, how to march. You're learning just like very grassroots basic stuff. And they have a whole psychological like program of like breaking you down and then recreating you into something new. And they do a very good job of that because they're getting just all walks of life from all over the country.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do you get everybody to like start operating as a team versus just like as an individual? And there's varying levels of like education in that group. You have like some really smart people, you have some people like not so smart, it's just a wide group of people.
Mm-hmm.
How do you get them to work together? And so the Navy was great at establishing, some discipline, some routines, and all those types of things. But when you go through Navy boot camp, you get a lot of injections. I was just getting injected, like you literally in a conveyor belt and just like pushing injections,
Mm.
anthrax, like who knows?
Sure.
Like you don't even ask questions. You're just like, oh, this is what we're doing today. We're going to medical.
Mm.
And I remember getting a lot of injections, and I remember being in boot camp getting really sick. And I'm not quite sure like what was going on, but I got really sick. But I'm like, all right, you just got to push through it. There's really no days off in boot camp, so you got to wake up early, do whatever the activities are. But by the time I got to aircrew school, I um, I was actually okay through aircrew school. I made it through aircrew school okay without any serious injury or anything like that. I made it through rescue swimmer school as well, without any injury or any flare ups. But when I got to AWA school, which is mainly 8 hours of classroom,
Mm-hmm.
so you're in a classroom all day and they have an agenda and it's mainly discussion and lecture. In the mornings, we would do a workout, but pretty much it's classroom all day long. And then when you're done with classroom, you go home, you eat, and then you get to kind of just hang out at the barracks with your friends. I started to get this crazy ripping pain in my neck.
Mm.
And it was like a fire lit inside my body that I just couldn't understand. And it
Mm.
was just like throbbing. And I would be in the classroom with my head down, and the teachers would be like, "You're okay." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm okay." Like, while everyone would go on like a recess break, I would just stay in the classroom with my head down. And it was just like this pulsating
Mm.
pain that was just stopping me from what I was doing. And
Dang.
so they would send me to sick call, and I would get some Motrin, and I would kind of share what was going on. And then I would go back to the classroom, and it just came in waves. And so it would kind of taper down and I would be okay. And then it would get me really bad. And so for the entire time I was in A school, it just played with me. It was the first time I ever experienced that. And I was like,
Mm.
what is this? And I didn't ask a lot of questions. I didn't want to get left behind. I just needed to keep moving forward. And so then we had the physical fitness element, right? Because we had to do PTs, what they call it in the Navy. And, a lot of push-ups, a lot of sit-ups, a lot of running. This is after rescue swimmer school, so we weren't swimming as much anymore, but we had to maintain our proficiency after hours. And sure enough, I would just push through the pain and get the workouts done, but it was always there.
Mm.
And so this pain haunted me through my entire military career. It would be completely gone at certain moments of my career, and then it would come back with a vengeance.
Mm.
And so I kept it kind of hidden, although I would go to the doctors. They would give me Motrin. When you're flying, there's not a lot of medications they could put you on because they might affect like cognitive function or something like that. So they really just give you the basics, like
Mm-hmm.
anti-inflammatory, like go home, rest, like do what you got to do. There's no x-rays. There was no like
Mm.
MRIs. It was just like very basic. And so I just powered through it, and it haunted me my entire military career,
Wow.
but I was able to kind of keep it at bay and just deal with it. And I kind of almost learned how to deal with it. And there was times where I just couldn't work out at all or couldn't do anything physical. But the best way I could describe it, it was a pulsing flame that would basically start in my neck, and I would feel it mainly in the middle of my back
Dang.
and my neck.
Mm.
And then it started to like just like affect like my strength and my arms and my hands and all this kind of stuff. And so what I can, knowing what I know now, it was some sort of neuroinflammation.
Yeah.
I had some sort of neuroinflammation that um, would have these outbursts, of waves of pain, and it would last for so long, and I would just kind of numb it. And I was numbing it at the time with Motrin and alcohol,
Mm.
and I would just numb it. And I remember if I could drink a lot, like it would really take the pain down, or I would
Yeah.
just kind of disassociate really with the pain. But I just had this idea that eventually it would just go away.
Mm.
And so all the stress of my military career, flying, lack of sleep, traveling, dangerous missions, just the rotation of the military life, especially when you're at war, because we did deploy in 2001 for the Afghanistan war,
Mm.
shortly after 9/11. It just haunted me throughout my entire career. And then eventually when I did get out, I'm skipping, most of my naval career here. And when I eventually did get out, it was still there and it still played with me. And so now I had the access to the VA healthcare system, local doctors. I worked for a university at the time. I had health insurance. And so I was just kind of getting passed around. Here's more Motrin. They did x-rays. They didn't find anything on the x-ray. No one quite knew how to diagnose me or what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just continued to have the same bad habits. But eventually it got to a point where it got so bad that I started to lose feeling in my hands and my feet.
Mm.
My legs, I was losing my balance. The pain would, instead of being like 3 or 4 days, it was now lasting a few weeks at a time. And it went from pain and eventually went to numbness.
Wow.
And I remember seeing a chiropractor at the time because the doctor was just giving me medicine. I'm like, I got to try something else. I went and saw a chiropractor, and he was doing adjustments on me in Scottsdale. And I remember one day he did an adjustment, and I went home and I lost feeling in my hands. I couldn't even tie my shoes anymore. If I was out at the bar drinking, I would literally, the bottle would just fall out of my hand and
Oh my
break
God.
in the bar because I would lose feeling in my hands.
Wow.
And so I went back to the chiropractor. He's like, "Hey, how's you going? Like, next appointment." I'm like,
Mm.
"Doc, the pain's going away, which is good." And he was excited for that. But I'm like, I'm losing like feeling, like, and he was doing like tests and stuff. And it was like, "You feel that? You feel that?" I'm like, "No, not really."
Dang.
And so he had this frightened look in his face. And I remember that frightened look, almost like, oh man, like I shouldn't have adjusted this guy, you know, and I didn't even do x-rays before I adjusted him.
Mm.
You know, he
Mm-hmm.
probably knew, like, you know, he could be liable maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough,
Jeez.
he was like, you need to go to your primary care doctor and you need to go see a neurologist. And so I went to primary care and I went to a neurologist. Neurologist like, well, it sounds like you have signs of multiple sclerosis.
Mm.
And he goes, we don't know for sure, but like that's kind of how it's showing up. And I had a history of this. My grandmother had multiple sclerosis, my mom's mom. So I had like seen her decline over
Wow.
many, many years.
It's
And so
terrifying.
I was terrified.
Yeah.
And so I was terrified because I had to wait for my MRI exam. So leading up to the MRI exam, I was terrified.
Yeah.
And
Your whole
then,
body's probably filled with dis-ease too because of that potential
oh
diagnosis,
yeah, I'm
you
thinking, oh
know?
my God, this, like, I'm like 25, 20, I was like 27 or 28 at the time. I'm like, my life could potentially be over. I
Yeah.
saw what my grandmother went through. She went blind. She was paralyzed.
Yeah.
Like, the worst of multiple sclerosis. I just literally watched it as a young kid and had to watch my family members take care of her. And so I was really scared. And I remember going into the MRI appointment, and there was this guy who was like, he was not the radiologist, like whatever the term is for the doctor that does the analysis of the scans, but he worked and he would take the pictures and put you in the machine. He was this really cool guy, and he was a vet.
Mm.
And so he connected with me right away. He's like, "Oh, you're a Navy vet. Cool. I did this in the Army," or whatever his role was. And I told him what I was dealing with. He's like, "Okay, like, yeah, we see a lot of multiple sclerosis," and they know what to look for. They
Mm.
basically in the MRI, they look for lesions on your brain. And you know, he was like, I felt like he was compassionate with me and concerned for me as well.
Mm.
And he put me in the tube, and they took all the pictures that they needed to take. And on the way out, when I was getting dressed, he came over to me. He's like, "Hey, I'm not a doctor. I technically can't be telling you this right now, but I do want to just like give you a breath of fresh air because
Wow.
I've seen so many scans and I've seen multiple sclerosis. I know what it looks like.
That's amazing.
And you still have to wait for your diagnosis from the doctor. Of course, they'll send the report out, but that can take like a couple weeks or whatever."
What a relief.
And he's like, "I don't see any multiple sclerosis," but he's like, "Your neck is screwed up."
Mm.
And he goes, "You have like serious problem on your spinal cord." And so the doctor's report will show that. Just make
Mm.
sure to get it to your, what are the doctors called that deal with bones and joints?
Osteo or not osteopath, but
Yeah,
yeah, osteopath.
yeah, orthopedic,
Orthopedic, sorry.
orthopedic
So
surgeon. Yeah, he's
yeah,
like, and just get that to your
orthopedic. Yeah.
orthopedic surgeon.
Yeah.
So, long story short, I was at work. It was my lunch break. Orthopedic surgeon calls me. "Hey, can you
Mm.
come in for an appointment today?" I leave on my lunch break with the expectation to go back to work. I was working at a university at the time in the military department. And he looked at the MRI. He puts it up on the screen. He goes, "What are you doing this afternoon?" I'm like, "I'm going back to work." He's like, "Yeah, you need emergency surgery."
Wow.
He's like, "Do you have any family, anybody in town that can help take care of you?" I'm like, "No, I'm out here by myself." He's like, "Well, this needs to get done right away." Tells me like what can happen, and paralyzed. You know, a lot of bad things can happen from this type of surgery.
Wow.
Um, he's like, "But we need to do it." He goes, "I have an opening on Friday. It's like Tuesday right now." He's like, "We have an opening on Friday. We need you to come in."
Wow.
So I'd make a few phone calls, go on FMLA, tell my boss I'm going to be out. And sure
Jeez.
enough, I went in for the procedure. And what they call this procedure is the anterior cervical. They go through your throat, they move your
Wow.
esophagus over. What they do is they take um, the discs that are herniated, that are pressing against your spinal cord. Apparently, at the time, I had a disc pressed against my spinal cord. I was leaking spinal fluid, which was like
Jeez.
messing with my equilibrium and whatnot. And I had potentially scarring on my spinal cord, which could be permanent damage. And so they were going to have to go in there, remove the discs. They take a cadaver part. They literally take a piece of bone from dead person and they fuse that to your spine, but it takes like a year for like the fusion to actually happen.
Wow.
So while that fusion's actually happening, they put it like a 4-inch titanium plate with like 4 or 6 screws,
Wow.
and they drill it to your spinal cord to keep your neck aligned. And so while your neck is being held up by this metal plate, that fusion is pairing bone to bone. And then
Wow.
eventually you lose the mobility, of course, because you don't have the discs there. You just have one piece of bone,
No
but you
kidding.
have to live with the metal in your neck forever.
Wow,
And
dude.
so that was the procedure that they did. It got done on like a Friday right before Thanksgiving, is what I remember. And then basically, I had to go through that recovery process. And so that was,
That's intense.
yeah, it was super intense. I lost a ton of weight. My body was full of anxiety. I was like not in a good place.
And you're alone.
And I was alone. Yep.
And what caused it? Was it the chiropractic neck adjustment, or what do you think it was? Was there ever a moment where you felt a catastrophe in that space?
Most people who would see an incident like that and be like, you got into a really bad car accident,
Right,
you
because it
know?
sounds so traumatic.
Yep. And so when I go back in my thoughts of like mapping when this happened, I'm like, when is the first time I felt this? And it was like, I felt it in aviation warfare school or maybe even aircrew school.
Mm,
It was my first flare up. So the
interesting.
only thing I can think of was some sort of neuroinflammation that was like
Wow.
messing with my body.
That chiropractor was risky messing with your neck. Oh,
Yes.
wow.
And I think on top of that, I was already inflamed. I already had this neuroinflammation. I was never hit by a car. I never had a helicopter accident. Now, I had a lot of pounding on my spine throughout my helicopter career. We would
Mm,
get hoisted up by a helicopter 70 feet in the air with your body kind of jerking, as you go up. Sometimes you're spinning on the way up. I was jumping out of helicopters into the water, a lot of compression. I was wearing night vision goggles for hours at the time with a big helmet that's like kind of
uh,
always moving your head
a
forward.
lot of repetitive
I
trauma.
was weight training, I was working out. It was so many different factors.
Hmm.
But why did that happen to me in aircrew school? Some sort of neuroinflammation. So I don't know if it's from one of the shots.
Right.
I don't know if like there was like some exercises that we were doing that sparked it.
That's crazy.
But I don't think I'll ever have the answer.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
yeah, I don't think I'll ever have the
Hmm.
answer. But it basically started in my military career,
Mm-hmm.
and it followed me outside of my military career. And then, sure enough, I got the procedure done. I went through the process of recovery, and I felt a lot better. But about a year later, I started to have complications again, and the
Mm,
neuroinflammation came back, and it started to show up in different parts of my back and also my neck again.
wow.
And I started to lose the feeling in my hands again. My hands were getting really clumsy. I had a hard time tying shoes, like
Wow.
just tying a shoe. My hands got clumsy typing,
Wow.
those types of things, and so the diagnosis was, okay, we have to go back in. We're going to fuse above and below where we already fused.
Mm,
You have some degenerative discs that are problematic. And so we're just going to go and fix those too. But you're not going to be able to do weightlifting. You're not going to be able to do a lot of different things. There's just too much risk. And that was about a year after my surgery. I believe I had that consultation. And
good
that's when I
God.
decided that I wasn't going to do the surgery and that I was actually going to start diving into alternative therapies.
What made you choose that? You just knew like this is an ongoing perpetual, it's creating more and more cascade of events. Or what was the tipping point which made you lean into that idea?
I had a few people in my life that were starting to plant seeds about like holistic things. And so I was actually like damaging my kidneys and my liver because I was over prescribing. And so I was taking a lot of like anti-inflammatory painkillers. I was doing all of these different things to basically like deal with the pain. I was getting these epidural injections as well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only so many of those you're allowed to get per year. And so I was doing all of the things that Western medicine had to offer at the time.
Yeah. Symptom management.
Yeah, symptom management. We thought we knew the root cause, which was the discs were degenerating. But there was just some people that came into my life at the time. I was starting to do some personal development work. I went through a program called Landmark Forum, and I was just kind of learning about the mind. And, I was very curious about that. I was reading some personal development books. I had gotten into Eckhart Tolle's, stuff. And I really just started to understand, or be curious about the mind. I didn't understand anything. I was just curious
Yeah.
about, oh, wait, you're in control of your own thoughts. Oh, that's interesting. And then I started to put the pieces together. I'm like, oh, when my flare ups are at the worst,
Mm-hmm.
when I was living my worst,
Yeah.
meaning the way I was treating myself, like self love, like over drinking, too much, marijuana, just like not good habits, the way I was treating people in my life.
Distraction and
Yeah, just like living sloppy. Like on paper, I looked great because I was
hmm.
in a good job. I was a director of operations for a big company, for a university. I had gone to school, got my undergraduate degree. I went back to school, got a master's degree in business, went back to school again, got another master's degree in adult education, had a house in Scottsdale, had a boat, had a nice car.
Yeah.
Like on paper, I looked great,
Sure.
like I was like, oh man, this guy's like really doing wonderful. My whole family was proud. Like, oh my God, he bought his first house at 25, and like we came from really humble beginnings, and now I have like a
Mm-hmm.
rock waterfall and pool and master bedroom that was like probably about the same size of the apartment I grew up in.
Yeah.
And so I was doing well internally. I was a mess.
Yeah.
I was a mess. I had no spiritual strength, just like no good practices. I just thought like going to the gym and like pumping weights was like healthy.
Yeah.
you know I didn't have good practices.
Yeah.
And the way my inner dialogue was really problematic. I was super intense. I was just like not compassionate. I was like, my ego was really dominating like my life at that time.
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
I was on a plane. I was listening to like a Howard Stern clip of some kind, and he was talking about Dr. John Sarno and back pain.
Hmm.
And I was like, I'll buy the book.
Yeah.
And so I bought the book. And at the time, I didn't understand anything about the mind body connection. I didn't even know it was a thing. It wasn't something that I was interested in at the time. And I read the book, and the book opened up my mind to understanding that there is a connection between your mind and your body. And what he describes as TMS, tension myoneural syndrome, and the connection of um, how your thoughts can manifest into physical pain,
Mm-hmm.
and unresolved emotions can result in physical pain, ailments, chronic illness, and sickness. And that you can explore every physical component, do every injection, every single um, procedure. But if you don't get your mind right,
Yep.
and if you don't get your emotions in order, you will continue to have this problem.
Yeah.
And I see it now in everyday life all the time. I see it all the time now.
Sure.
Now my awareness is super open to
Yeah.
like, oh, that's TMS syndrome.
Yeah.
You've been dealing with this aches and pains for a long time. Like, you've done everything, you still can't solve it. So I recommend the book all the time in my
Yeah.
life. And so he gave me the deeper understanding of what psychosomatic pain was.
Yeah.
And it's not this false pain. It's not imaginary pain. It's literally pain, but it's not stemming from the area. It's literally stemming from your mind. And so that gave me the opportunity to explore the mental emotional element of healing, which was the part that I didn't do.
Yeah.
Everything I did was physical, prescription drugs, over the counter, illegal drugs, right? I was like smoking weed and doing stuff like that at the time. Um, and it's just allowed me to open up a door to say, okay, I'm going to start diving into the world of mental health, which I didn't even like that word. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you see this in the fire community. Like, going to speak with a shrink was like the last thing I wanted to do. And plus, I was kind of a bully. I would go into these appointments with the shrink,
Mm-hmm.
with the psychologist, and I just like was so closed, and I wouldn't allow them to get in
Yeah.
because they wanted to revisit my past and my family and my
Shield.
upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wasn't interested in being vulnerable. I saw that vulnerability is a weakness. I was programmed at some point in my life that that's weakness.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize like vulnerability is power until later on in my life. And showing your true self is a really important thing to do. And
Mm.
I just was not open to their recommendations, and so they diagnosed me with PTSD. They diagnosed me with, anxiety, depression, all these different types of things,
Mm-hmm.
and I rejected that. I did not want to be labeled as that, and so I didn't make any progress with talk therapy. Talk therapy wasn't not a good avenue for me. Really, what I needed was God.
Yeah.
It's really what I needed. And so I just started to explore, and that opened up my first door on personal development, mental health, spirituality, holistic alternative methods.
What
And I
was
tried everything.
what was some of your first big, profound shifts? Like I know reading the John Sarno's Open the Window.
Open the window, but then it's like, what do you do about
Yeah,
it?
where's the embodied somatic or whatever?
Yeah, like what do you
So
do now?
yeah.
Now you understand that like
Mm-hmm.
this might be the root cause.
Yeah.
Like, what do you actually do to
Yeah.
resolve it?
Because I found Sarno's and all these people to reverse engineer things I accidentally found that were breaking me open, and I didn't have language for it.
Right,
So I found it in the opposite direction. But
right.
it's always curious to find what did you find that was actually truly healing?
I started to put together the pieces that when I was living like a very intense lifestyle, and I was like, go, 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 over drink, stay up late, not sleep, grind. Like I had this weird chip on my shoulder that
Mm-hmm.
I could like get everything accomplished. I was a full time employee at a university. I went to night school from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night after work, multiple days a week.
Just hammering.
Hammering. So I'm writing papers, I'm studying, I'm making excellent grades, I'm doing presentations at the university and just like doing really well. And I was never a good student prior to the Navy. So I was like really happy that I was finally like a good student. I was smart and I was like able to do well.
Yeah.
I was
Almost like seeking validation for
seeking
yourself in that
validation for
way.
myself.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I was working a full time job. I had moved up to become a manager, had a team of 17 people, had moved up eventually to become a director, and then eventually became a senior director of operations, which is one step down from vice president for my department. So I was just like crushing it
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, where I was just, my colleagues were like, Michael's bright, he's sharp, he's responsible. When I was in the Navy, same thing, super responsible, became rescue swimmer instructor, became naval aviation and training instructor,
Mm-hmm.
was like really building my confidence, which is really what I needed. Had great mentors around me, that people I can trust, who like gave me good advice. Um, and I was managing a house, bought a house and paying the bills, and I was buying all of these things. I was literally trying to buy myself happiness by getting a boat and getting a car and a motorcycle. And every other month I was dating somebody new,
Mm-hmm.
literally just like chasing happiness,
Yeah.
like in any way I can find. And like happiness, when you chase it through materialism, is like you get a blip of like happiness and it
Mm-hmm.
rides for a little bit and then it's like goes away.
Yeah.
And then you need the next blip. And it's just like you
Yeah.
chasing happiness.
Hedonic treadmill, they call it.
Yep. And I just didn't make any progress there. But I didn't realize that I wasn't making any progress there. I was just chasing it.
Mm.
And so the things that I started to do very early on, to get back to your original question, was I really just opened up the book and I said, okay, the most powerful thing I had to do at that moment, the number one thing I did, is I started saying no. I
Good.
started saying no to all the invitations that I was getting that were going to put me in a situation that was not good for my mental health. Parties, lots of people, lots of drunk people. I mean, you remember just being around crowds of drunk people is just an obnoxious
Mm-hmm.
energy,
Yeah.
to be around them. And you never know where the night's going to lead. Could lead into a fight. It can
Mm-hmm.
lead into, you sleeping around with
Mm-hmm.
somebody you don't even know, like so many bad things come from those scenarios because you're just not,
And superficial relationships.
super superficial relationships. Exactly. And so the first thing I had to do was start saying no. So I would get the invitation, hey, we're all going to the big golf tournament, we're all going to party, and that was going to be an all-day bender. No. Hey, I'm having a barbecue, all the guys are coming over, and we're going to play cards after, and they would get shit-faced and smashed, and no. Oh, we're all going to Vegas at so-and-so's, bachelor party, whatever like that. No.
Yeah.
So the first thing I started doing was just saying no to scenarios that would put me in an environment where I was going to be enticed to drink and be promiscuous, or just like deal with things that I knew that were not going to like help me.
Yeah.
And so that was the most powerful thing that I can ever do.
Yeah.
Was just learn how to say no and just not accept people's invitations. And some of my friends just started to drift away, right? People just start to leave your life. He's like, oh, Mike's no more fun. He's not fun anymore.
Exactly.
And so no was the first thing that I started to do, and literally just be more of a homebody, spend more time alone, slow down.
Yeah.
Slowing down was a big thing. I didn't need to be busy every single moment of my day.
Yeah.
I was already working and going to school and taking care of the house. So that was extremely important.
Yeah.
And then eventually I had heard, I was reading a lot of books at the time, and everything was like meditation, meditation, meditation. It's so good for you. But every time I did meditation, I got nothing out of it. I'm like, this is like, what is this? And I would hear people talk about, oh, I did a meditation and I just felt so good after, and I was connecting with the ethers and like all this kind of information. I'm like, I'm not getting any of that. I would sit on the floor in my living room and attempt to meditate, and literally,
because it is the opposite of what they're talking about. It's creating space to feel uncomfortable.
Right. And it was so uncomfortable for me to be in silence. Like, I didn't realize how anxious my mind was and how I needed to constantly always be busy.
Yeah.
And I just couldn't be with myself. I didn't know how to be with myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's really common in our culture. And I wasn't getting anything out of meditation. I was literally just thinking about like what I needed to do later, or what I should have done, earlier today. But I knew it was still there. I was like, there's something here, because everyone keeps talking about it, and all these like successful people like talking about how important it is. So I went and did the transcendental meditation program. I don't know if you remember that. All the Hollywood stars were doing it at the time. And then I heard a clip. I think it was Joe Rogan at the time, and it's like way before he got super famous, but he started talking about float tanks.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting, like a float tank. Okay. And is there a float tank near me? And I found one, and it was in Chandler. It was Tempe. What's the name of that place? True Rest Float Spa. It's like the original one in Phoenix.
I saw Nick yesterday.
Yeah, Nick's a great guy. Yeah, I saw him at the TPUSA event. And I remember doing my first float tank and saying, oh, okay, I get it. It was the first time I was able to get into a relaxed state. It was the first time I was able to actually like connect and get into that dreamy kind of sleepy place where I was able to process things from a different perspective. I was able to feel my nervous system actually slightly settle down after the event. And so I started to go routinely, and just became my little personal outing of like, oh, this is my little happy place. I'll go there. I'd do my float. I'd sit and read a book after. I'd have interesting conversations with the people that worked there. And so that was like a really big part of my transformation, because it allowed me to meditate. And at the time I was studying Edgar Cayce's work. I was a big fan of Edgar Cayce. Edgar Cayce brought me back to spirituality.
Amazing.
He was a psychic, as you know, from the 1800s, died in like 1945 or something like that. Had all these predictions, but he also had a lot of readings where he was diagnosing people's health. And so I started to look through all of his logs on like, okay, like what did Edgar Cayce have to say about depression? What did Edgar Cayce have to say about anxiety? What did Edgar Cayce have to say about this and that? And he had all these like home remedies, castor oil packs, and different prayers. He actually had meditations and prayers combined. And so then I would recite these meditations and do the Edgar Cayce meditations. And so I really started to develop this connection with God and spirituality, and it started to like change my direction and my perspective. And what I realized was the more I lived a life of kindness and service to the people around me, whether it was my team, my employees, my friends, the people I started surrounding myself with, I slowed down. I did more hiking. I did more things in nature versus just like slinging weights in a artificial light gym.
Yeah.
I started to do all of these simple things, and I realized, oh, the flare-ups would go away. And so the harder I lived and the worse decisions I would make, whether I was like being out of integrity in some sort of way, I would feel the pain.
Mm-hmm.
The more I was like kind and caring for myself and for people around me, and even the way like I was addressing like my family at the time, people started to notice a noticeable change about me, and I would have less pain. So I would literally just always analyze, how was I living? Like if I had a flare up,
Mm-hmm.
the first thing my mind would go to is like, okay, what have I been doing over the last week or two that like potentially created this? And so what I've really learned about my symptoms is that my body was in something called a high sympathetic tone. And it was something that probably came from the military career that I did not have the skill sets to adjust out of.
Yeah.
And being in a high sympathetic dominance is important because you have to make decisions very quickly, fight or flight decisions, impulsive decisions. I was like kind of revered for being able to do such a good job of how to make smart, important, impulsive decisions that would keep the crew safe in a very dangerous situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I relied too much on that.
Yeah.
And I applied that to other areas of my life where it just wasn't beneficial. I had a hard time integrating. Listen, that may have been necessary for the helicopter search and rescue role. It is not necessary for my relationships. It is not a good skill set for my personal relationships. It is not necessary for my corporate job at this time. Like it's just not needed. And so I really had to change my lifestyle and the way I think and the
Sure.
way I process things and the way I responded. And Eckhart totally helped me with that because he helped me to understand the mind.
Mm-hmm.
When your mind is present, that's where you have the most power, the power of the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're constantly thinking about the future and you're anticipating the future, you are creating anxiety in your life just by constantly trying to ruminate about what might happen before it even happens. And
Yeah.
you're getting yourself all worked up over something that hasn't even occurred yet. And you don't even know if it's going to turn out that way.
Right.
I tend to do that more. I wasn't a big depressed guy. I didn't
Yeah.
think too much about my past and could have, should have, would have type of attitude. I was constantly spending too much of my day in the future.
Yeah.
And so I had to cultivate a practice of how can I learn how to be more present in life? And what does that even mean? And how does that even show up? And float tanks were something that helped me because it helped me to get more parasympathetic and slow down. I was also having a lot of have you ever had these things where you have this like sleep paralysis
Yep.
where you wake up in the middle of the night and you're
Yeah.
frozen?
Like catatonic state.
Yeah, and you can see what's going on in the room and you try to scream or reach out or
Mm-hmm.
yell, even though if nobody was in the home, I was living by myself at the time,
And you're
and
mute.
you mute.
Yeah.
Those were happening. I don't know what those are. I don't know what that
Mm-hmm.
phenomenon
It's
is.
like a helplessness.
It's a weird helplessness, but I would
Mm.
have those for years,
Hmm.
for years, even in naps, not just nighttime sleeping. Even if I took a nap, I would end up on the couch and I'm like, oh, am I like being possessed here? Like, what is going on here?
Yeah.
And so for like a whole year, I actually slept on my couch.
It's like anesthesiology almost. You're just like paralyzed.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. And so I would sleep on my couch because it like felt more safe there for some weird
Hmm.
reason. Like my room, I was like, I'm not even sleeping in there. And I also had a lot of issues with stomach and digestive.
Hmm.
I think I process a lot of things emotionally. And so I carry a lot of my stress in my gut, which is also very common.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would have girlfriends that were either living at the house or staying at the house over the years. And every single morning, I would wake up, I would take my shower, whether I was going to work or whether it was a weekend day, and I would gag and dry heave in the shower.
Hmm.
And I would sometimes throw up. sometimes throw up, sometimes not, but it was always
Yeah.
gagging and always dry heaving. And I'm like, what is that? And people who were living with me were like, that's
Yeah.
not normal, Michael. Like,
Yeah.
you need to go see somebody about that.
And the nervous system was so wound up, the hot water was probably allowing it to freaking, you were paying attention in that moment, maybe, who knows? But
I think it was just such a buildup of like unresolved stress and emotional stress and mental stress that I wasn't processing. I was just like constantly
mm,
on to the next thing, and I wasn't dealing with like my issues, and I was numbing them
mm-hmm.
um, with alcohol or drugs at the time, and I wasn't processing things in a healthy way, and it would build up so strong that the body had to purge the energy out in order for it to function. And so when I got into ayahuasca years later, I really learning that that's a big part of purging is releasing the energy. It's not necessarily about like, oh, I'm sick, I ate too much food or I had too much alcohol, now I'm throwing up because
Yep.
I'm toxic. It's actually you're purging this energy out of your body because like Wim Hof always says, like we have issues in our tissues,
Mm-hmm.
and so your body just kind of like knows what to do. And since I wasn't doing any of the work, it would like literally push this energy out of me just to like maintain like some sort of balance and
Yeah.
homeostasis. And so I had stomach digestive issues, uh, yeah, gagging and or dry heaving, and so the sleep paralysis, the sleep disorders, the not being able to get to sleep, not being able to stay asleep, being tired the entire next day, taking way too much coffee, but still grinding. I
Yeah.
couldn't let go of this constant need to be productive, this
Yeah.
psychological thing to be productive.
Yeah. And that's what we reward in our culture is momentum, productivity. So it's actually you're getting rewards for it. So it
Right.
keeps you on the loop.
Yes.
And it sounds like the real tipping point was creating space, slowing down, saying no, to feel a little uncomfortable, to reckon with what was the truth. And then it leads you to more and more avenues of, oh, I need to heal. You can't heal if you're keeping busy. I've noticed in my life, float tanks changed my life. Sitting in the creek on plant medicines, things like that, where you're actually feeling and grieving, going, oh my God, I'm
Yeah.
full of all this stuff,
I process it.
programming. And it's hard to unprogram and build new programs if we just stay busy.
Stay
So I think
busy.
busyness is a real problem.
Always distracted. And then you get home and you watch TV and you disassociate.
Yeah.
So I was constantly disassociating, not dealing with things that needed to be dealt with, not changing my perspective, and
Hmm.
then bringing that energy into all of my interactions.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these things were really crippling me in many different ways. And I think God was like, literally putting his boot on my neck of like, are you going to pay attention? Are you
Yeah.
going to pay attention? Oh, you're not going to pay attention? We're going to press harder.
Yeah.
Oh, you're paying attention now. You're seeing things differently. And I'm going to release the tension of my boot on your neck.
Yeah.
And so eventually you'll get on the right path because you're not on the right path. And
Mm.
so John Sarno opened me up to psychosomatic pain,
Yeah.
tension myoneural syndrome. Eckhart Tolle opened me up to understanding anxious thinking, past thinking, power of the present moment. So I got good fundamentals. Landmark Forum at the time helped me to understand that we tell ourselves stories and we run these rackets, and we're not being our authentic self. We're constantly showing people a side of us that we just want them to see. We're not actually making deep connections because we're not being vulnerable. So I learned the power of vulnerability through Landmark. I learned the power of epigenetics and how our environment actually is impacting our DNA, not
Hmm.
necessarily just our genetics. And that was, uh, what's his name? Biology of Belief.
Yep.
Um,
Oh, Bruce
Bruce
Lipton.
Lipton.
Yep.
Bruce Lipton was like huge for me. I was
Yeah.
like consuming all of his work. I went
Hmm.
and saw him speak. I was really intrigued by what he had to say about genetics because I grew up in that
Yep.
old-fashioned, stereotypical Italian American family. Oh, your great grandmother, she was depressed, and
So you're gonna be
that's
the
from that
yep.
side of the family, and
Hmm.
now you got that bug, and so
Hmm.
now you have no. It's just part of who you are, like
Yeah. You're a
and
slave to your
you're a slave
genes.
to your genes. And I was like, I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Like there's something deeply inside my body was just like, no, we have control.
Yeah.
We have the ability to change. Oh, people don't change. That was also the thing.
Yeah.
People never change.
Yeah.
And I didn't believe that
Yeah.
either. And so I went on this like mission, like deeply to change.
Yeah.
And I tried everything. I tried Reiki. I tried meditation. I tried sound healing. Eventually, I got deeply into breathwork when I learned about Wim Hof. I eventually got into ice baths and saunas. Saunas kind of first.
Mm.
I started doing more time in nature and not looking at hiking as just this physical workout, outdoor workout. So hiking was always just an outdoor workout.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, it's much more than an outdoor workout,
Yeah.
actually. It's like a mental health activity.
Yeah.
Um, I started doing things like Landmark where I had to open up and share. So like emotionally, like that was kind of helping me at the time, just to
Mm-hmm.
process emotions. My diet was still iffy at the time. So I had not really checked the boxes on like, caring about the type of food that you're bringing into your body and what role that plays. So I was like definitely overeating for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and then eventually in 2014 is when I started dabbling with psychedelics, and
Yeah.
that like took me up to a different level of understanding, a much deeper level of understanding.
Yeah.
And then I went way down the rabbit hole on that, and
Yeah.
that was like an interesting part of my life too.
Yeah. And I love the part of when you said no to that surgery, that's a huge step because you stop putting your trust in authority. And I did the same when I had back injury, 3 bulge disc. They wanted to do injections. So I went down a very similar avenue. And that's when I woke up to going, all right, this is just, I've seen the guys that get put on pain meds.
Right,
They blow their head off eventually, or they just have surgery, and it turns into whatever the cascade is. And I'm like, man, I got to go and be curious and take my own authority. And people now, you own Optimize in the center, and people could go, well, he's not a doctor. Who is he to help people? Go trust your doctor.
right,
Well, most doctors go truly, not saying all doctors, but what is their authority? Where did they learn from? The
right,
centralized model. And
right,
so it's a whole bunch of things, but you took the authority and you are still curious and open and learning consistently forever. And I think curiosity and wonder and inner authority is so big, and really seeking the truth, because it doesn't matter what school you came from, it's some form of indoctrination.
of
And so we
course,
have to learn from everyone. And that's one thing when we met that I really appreciated about you, is because you're not just a cog in a machine, and you're not obedient and compliant, but you're also open and curious, and you have principles and a foundation, and you know what works, and you try to share. You have service. You're not just doing it to self-help and go to the next workshop, which is its own trap.
right. It's a
And now
trap,
you're going to Bali, and you're trying to avoid actually getting back in and helping others,
right?
which is one thing that we talked about earlier, is being of service is actually part of the spiritual component.
So important.
It's like it gives you meaning, it fills you up, it pulls you. You don't have to feel tired when you're giving. So I'd love to get into like what point you did the plant medicines, and that was probably when you were like, I need to go and help others, get everyone else's head above water. Anyway, let's get into some of that part of your journey.
Yeah, I didn't know how to help others at that time. I was not necessarily in a place of service. I was working for a university. I was doing a good job. I had very good relationships with my employees. I always was a pretty good leader. It's one thing that's like carried me from my military career and beyond to present day was I had the ability to gain buy-in. I think that's one of the most important leadership qualities that you can have, because it doesn't matter on what your initiative is or what you're selling or anything like that. Like if you cannot get the team behind it, even if you have to deliver them bad news, at least they're coming from a place like, okay, we understand why we have this new thing that we have to do or whatever. I had this like unique ability to get buy-in from people.
Mm.
And so I just continued to develop that. So I was being of service in an element because I did have good relationships like with my staff, and I cared, and I think they knew I cared, and I had built just great relationships throughout my career. And I think that's what kept kind of moving me up the ladder. It's like the higher ups kind of saw that, and I was very stable in the sense that like you know what you get when you have Michael like in charge, and I had good work ethic, but I wasn't necessarily like in service. And I remember my first ayahuasca ceremony, when I went down to Brazil in 2014, I didn't know much about the molecule. I had watched one documentary about it, which was DMT, the spirit molecule, but they don't really even talk about ayahuasca that much. It's really just like a clip within that whole
Mm-hmm.
documentary. So I had heard of it, but I really wasn't that familiar with it. I had experimented with some psychedelics earlier on in my teenage years and had had some spiritual experiences from it, but didn't quite do it in a ceremonial, like spiritual way. It was just more of a leisure activity
Mm-hmm.
that was fun and gave you like funny things to talk about the next day. So I did have some experience and I knew how powerful they were, but I've never done something in a curated ceremonial way ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not familiar with the music of ayahuasca and the lineage and the roots and the origins and all of those things at that time either. And so I had gone down to Brazil and I had the opportunity to sit in like, I think 4 ceremonies or so in a 2-week period. Um, Different types of ceremonies. One was Santo Daime, which is like a very different type of lineage. The other ones were
Mm-hmm.
more like the traditional way. And at that time, I was a little burnt out at my job. I was ultimately in a position where they were laying a lot of people off, and I had like 9 lives. Like I was not getting laid off. They kept elevating me while a lot of the staff were getting laid off. I'm like, oh, this is
Mm.
weird. And there was an opportunity for me to compete to become the vice president, but I just didn't care about the mission anymore. Like I just lacked the desire. The only thing that was keeping me there at that time was I had some good relationships. I had a mentor that I really liked. He was a retired Army Green Beret, and he was the vice president at the time. And he was getting ready to step away. And so that led me an opportunity to basically take over his position. He had groomed me and chosen me to become a senior director. And I had learned a lot from him.
Mm-hmm.
But once he was making that decision to leave, I was like, there's nothing else here for me. I learned what I could from him in that period of time that I worked for him.
Mm-hmm.
But now that he's gone, like I'm just not passionate about the mission anymore. Like I just don't care,
Yeah.
to be honest with you.
Yeah.
All I care about is the security and the money that I had from the job, and the bonuses were fantastic. Um, I just didn't believe in the mission, to be honest with you, anymore. It's just like done with the whole for-profit
Mm-hmm.
school model. And I would say the changing element for me at that time is I went to the ceremony and I asked, what am I here to do? Like, please, whatever is communicating with me, the spirit of ayahuasca, maybe it's your own consciousness. Who knows who you're talking to, but you're clearly having some sort of dialogue
Yeah.
with something. And I never quite understood that. I don't fully understand it now. I hear what other people have said about it, but I don't really know. But you are communicating with something.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember being able to ask questions while you're in that meditative, hypnotic state under the influence of ayahuasca and getting some sort of response. I'm like, oh, this is wild. I
Mm-hmm.
could literally ask questions and then I would like get answers,
Mm-hmm.
and not just hear it through your ears, like feel it deeply in your body
And see
and
and
see and
experience.
experience. I'm like, this is amazing. Like, wow,
Mm.
like this is like therapy times 1,000, you know? And what was really intriguing is that I asked the question in the middle of the night, what am I here to do? Like, what is my purpose? What is my role? Like, like I was like yearning for a career change. So I was thinking about going to work for Tesla, and I was actually looking at moving to Nevada at the time, and I was going to start applying for them. I had a great resume, had my education, I had like 14 years experience, and a big company. I had my military career. They had a hiring preference for veterans. I was like a shoo-in
Yeah.
to go work for Tesla up in Nevada. They were building one of their big plants up there,
Mm-hmm.
and the message that came through is like super clear, as clear as it can be. You are here to be a teacher, and
Mm.
I was so disappointed. I was so disappointed. I was like, I remember in the morning, the girl who I was doing the ayahuasca ceremony with, and it was a big group, but she had introduced me to this group in Brazil. She's like, so like, how was your night? How was your journey? Like, what came up? And I mean, a lot of things came up. There's many elements to that ceremony, but like, I was like, I asked what I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be doing in the rest of my life, and it said I was supposed to be a teacher. And now I'm thinking in my life, like I'm going from this like 6-figure plus job with these amazing bonuses to going and get a job at a high school and teaching
Mm.
history or social studies or something, you know.
Your model of teacher
My
was just
model of
off.
teacher was way off.
Yeah.
And so I left that relatively disappointed, didn't quite get the answer, didn't fully understand, didn't know what that meant, didn't know where to go with that, even though I had a master's degree in adult education and training.
Yeah.
So I already like was prepping myself for teaching in this weird way.
And
Like,
self-healing and all the things you're learning about to get over this terrible thing that a lot of people are going through right now and
right,
forever.
right.
So
And I was just like,
you're going through the courses of life.
yeah, I'm like, what the hell is it like teacher? Like, what am I going to do? Go work at a university and teach and be a professor? Like, I was just really disappointed. And then later on, I'm like, oh, wait, no, teaching is many different branches and many different elements and could be very successful. Like, there's, it doesn't just mean you work at the high school, you work at the university and you're just a teacher for the government or the
Right.
school. And so that was very intriguing, and that kind of like sparked my next move, which was my career change into personal development, health and wellness, and then eventually entrepreneurship, which, opening up the locations and whatnot.
Yeah. And it sounds like when you were asking that question too, one of the things I've noticed is when it comes to, at least for me, it's subjective, of course, but that sincerity of when you were finally at your wit's end, you're at the tipping point of like, I'm done. I'm empty with this career, this life. And you talked to God. You asked permission. You prayed, but you prayed from a place of deep sincerity. You know what I mean? And I think when you do that and you truly listen, and even if the answer doesn't come clear or however it
Right,
looks, your heart was becoming sincere. And that's huge
right.
because you can pray all day long. I grew up praying in a way that was so insincere. It was almost like a model that I just would go to bed, thanks, want,
Want, yeah,
move on,
right.
you know?
A lot of
And I
wants.
feel like there's got to be a point when we, in our life, Viktor Frankl talks about this, many different teachers I've tried to learn from, and it's a pattern of sincerity from the heart. And so it sounds like at some point you really found and started to open up your heart and
I was
started to
opening
listen
up
with
my
the heart
heart.
and listening with the heart and
Yeah,
starting to pay attention, like, what is my life's purpose? The bigger questions.
bigger question.
And those are more daunting questions. You know, it's like, okay, now that you have to get rid of your ego, your identity, and it's dissolving slowly, slowly. And then the psychedelics can play a big role, not to advocate it, but it can be a really huge, faster way to do it if it's in the right container where it's like, oh my gosh, my whole life's a fraud, you know, because we're all conditioned to play in the matrix. And then
Right.
you realize the thing's a scam and it's empty.
Yeah. There was a
So,
lot of fraud stuff that came up. And that's like an interesting mirror that the psychedelics showed of like, one of the most powerful things it showed me is like, okay, when you are acting in this way with this level of intensity and you're just seeing it from your own blinders, I'm going to now show you an example of how that conversation or how the way you're acting, how that's affecting the people around you. And so it allowed me to actually experience how they experienced me. And I was like, oh,
mhm.
gross.
Yeah,
Like it just made me want to vomit,
yeah,
I'm like, oh man, like I
yeah.
need to change my approach. And I can't believe that I'm even treating the people this way, my family, like man, my ego was just running the show. So it beautifully
Hmm.
showed me a lot in a short period of time. It allowed me to process things in a short period of time. It connected me with music that I would never used to listening to.
Mhm.
I grew up listening to hip hop and rap and rock and roll and all of the things, right? 80s, 90s, which is, all wonderful in its own way. And now is being introduced to this beautiful instruments from around the world and this singing and this voice and this language that I was
Mm.
just like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah,
And I was so inspired about the kindness of the people in that room and how they treated me as a foreigner in Brazil and like were so cool with me and so open, and it was beautiful. And
mm.
so then I went down the rabbit hole and I started to experience all of their medicines. I did Cambo, I did Rapé, I did other ayahuasca ceremonies. Then eventually I did some cactus ceremonies with San Pedro and peyote, and I did sweat lodges. And I really just started to dive deep into Native American origins and history. And so I was very fascinated with what did Native Americans have to say about health and spirituality. And that's ranging all the way from the tribes of Canada all the way down to South America, because they all had a lot of practices that were very common, even though those tribes may have not have communicated
Mm-hmm.
together. And then when I started to study more world history, which I was always fascinated with sociology and anthropology and history, I started saying, wait, indigenous people throughout the entire globe were all kind of doing similar things,
Mm-hmm.
even though they had no communication. There was symbolism that was similar. You would find certain symbols, like in the jungle of Peru, that you can find in other parts of the world.
Yep.
And I started to connect all the dots. I'm like, there is this universal wisdom and knowledge that actually is just here. And our ancestors, regardless of what culture you come from, whether it's European culture, Asian culture, African culture, the Aborigine indigenous culture of Australia, or the native people of the Americas, and even all of the island people, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's this deep rooted natural wisdom that really comes from the earth. It's more like Gaia, it's like earth medicine
Yeah.
that they were tapping into, that they understood. And so I became very intrigued with studying Native American culture, not just kind of what happened to them when Europeans came here, and really learning about that situation. I really started to learn about their practices, their language, their songs, their music, and their procedures. You know, sweat lodge, or certain tribes would use peyote, or certain tribes would use San Pedro, Huachuma in the mountains of the South America. Then I learned about the mushroom shamans of Mexico, and learned about the mushroom shamans of Siberia, and learned about, of course, all the ayahuasca culture and the indigenous tribes of Peru and Brazil and Colombia and Ecuador. Like, they all had their own version of it, but like different approach and style to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to learn about their history, and I just became really fascinated. And that eventually took me to the Amazon jungle, where I started to study with um, some teachers there and get deeper into their lineage and their learning. And so I just went way down the rabbit hole,
Mm-hmm.
and really learned, and eventually learned how to play music and all those types of things. But I did a lot of psychedelics, and I'm not advocating either for psychedelics. I think it could be useful in the right set and setting, but I never had a bad trip. Like, there's a lot of people that like had terrifying trips. I've had hard moments
Sure.
because I've had to really like reflect on how I was living, or how I communicated, or what I was doing. And so I had tough moments, and that required some purging and some illness, you know, in the middle of the night, but it would always switch into something beautiful eventually.
Mm.
And so I realized that I had the ability to also navigate the experience um, based on prayers and love. And ayahuasca and the Native American stuff, you know, a lot of people in Christian communities, they see like anything that is like pre-Christian as being like demonic or
Pagan.
pagan,
Mm-hmm.
and just like that, like puts a really sad taste in their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
The more I learned about Native American history, the more I learned about spirituality, the more I experimented with different psychedelics, actually, the closer it brought me to God and Jesus in a deeper connection, much deeper way than I ever got from when I was going to church in my early years.
Mm.
And so it had the ability to open my heart in a way. And of course, you always see the picture of Jesus, right, with the heart and the flame, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, out of the thinking, logical, analytical mind, how do you approach things from the heart? How do you
Mm-hmm.
approach people with your heart? And so that was also very powerful for me. It strengthened what I was already learning through Edgar Cayce and his work, and
Mm-hmm.
through other spiritual practices, and just deepen my relationship
Yeah.
with God, with Jesus, but also having a more open mind to other religions and like how they were kind of getting to the same place from different angles.
Mm-hmm.
And so I believe Christ consciousness is a universal thing, that various religions are essentially singing the same song and tune
Sure.
and talking about Christ consciousness, and there being multiple ways to get there.
Yeah. And trying to interpret it through their culture, their language, their expression.
Right.
It comes and looks in different ways, as it should.
It looks in different ways.
Art looks differently in each culture, buildings. So it's like human consciousness as culture creates it, but it's tapping into the same space, same heart-centered element.
Heart-centered element. And,
Yeah.
What always comes up for me with Jesus is the kingdom of God is within us, and I always really held on to that really strong. And I'm like, I understand that at a very deep level now. That's not just like this nice saying that I could just like recite every now and then. Like, I really understand that there is this inner world of magic and beauty and like power that we all possess, but we don't necessarily tap into
Mm-hmm.
very often. And, there was this amazing documentary in the early 2000s, Inner Worlds, Outer Worlds. Have you ever watched that one?
No.
It was one of the things that like really opened me up. And they talked a lot about the power of the inner worlds and all of the ancient lineages that were able to, talk about just the power of the inner worlds. Beautiful. And how much is going on in there, and subconsciously what's happening in the brain and brain waves and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And then not seeking outside of yourself or someone else to be the authority again. You're going back within and asking for permission or guidance from something bigger and more connected to you. That's beautiful.
Right.
When did you find Wim Hof? I can't remember. And when did you start learning from him? Because that was a pretty influential time.
Yeah, so now my body's already really, and my mind was really primed for Wim Hof. I was like able to hear his message from a very different perspective. And so maybe 2016 or 15, I forget the exact date. Whenever the Vice documentary came out, I watched the documentary. I thought it was fascinating. I was already intrigued about health because I was like solving my own health issues, and I was like way into Edgar Casey's work of trying to find solutions for other people's health issues. And so I was sharing his work with other people. Like, we had this lady at work who her son was constantly having seizures. And so I could just tell like the type of stress that it was putting on her. And she was a colleague at the time. And so I was like literally sharing with her. Let me throw this over there. It keeps buzzing. I kept sharing with her, different things that I was learning from a holistic approach, and everything was rooting in nature. So I was like always coming back to like these systematic things. The kingdom of God is within, the power is within, Eckhart Tolle, power of the present moment, Bruce Lipton, like you are in control of your own environment. Your perspective controls your environment. That's shaping your DNA. Native Americans talking about connecting with nature, the power of the sun, the power of grounding, the power of the forest, the power of the elements of nature. So there's all these like repeated things that were happening, and so I already had this base understanding and fundamental knowledge of, okay, internal, find more ways to be present, develop a practice to be more present, connect with nature, meditation being a way to spirituality, prayer being a way to spirituality, being of service a way to being spirituality, being more vulnerable, learning how to share your authentic self, power of kindness in all interactions, in everyday life, which is something you can apply like every day, all the time, in many different ways. So there's like these universal truths that I was becoming aware of. And then I watched the documentary. And then what's Wim Hof talking about? The power of nature, the power of your own mind, going within. You can control your own immune system. You can control your own autonomic nervous system at will. You have issues in your tissues. So now it's connecting also with the work of Dr. Sarno.
Yeah.
I'm like, wait, his message is like Dr. Sarno's message, just from a different angle. But it's like really they're talking about the same thing.
And he's doing it.
And he's doing it, right? He's not
Proving.
just lecturing,
Yeah.
right? He's actually doing it. He's putting the body in these positions where he had 26 Guinness records, like doing these crazy feats, showing the world like we are much more capable. And so I was really inspired by the documentary. I remember sending it to my nephew, who thought it was cool, but like not something he was really going to take action on. I had a friend locally that was also intrigued. We started practicing the method together, literally just doing the breath work in his backyard.
Was that Jesse, or who was your friend?
This guy named Fadi.
Okay,
Yeah, my
cool.
buddy Fadi. And
Mm-hmm.
so he lived out in Peoria, and we would go to his house,
Mm-hmm.
and we would literally do the breath work in the backyard together. And then we would set up these tubs with ice, and then we would get into the
Yeah.
tubs with ice, and we would do like 5 minute ice baths, and then we would get out and we would like jump on a trampoline to warm up,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'd go do the ice bath again.
Cool.
And I just remember feeling amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is the most simple, easiest technique that can change your state immediately. And so now that's the work of Joe Dispenza, who I was also studying at the time, is about changing your state of being. He was also talking about breath work and brainwave states and all of that. And so like all of it was like coming full circle for me. I had the plant medicine and the plant shamans, right, of the Peru and Brazil. They're talking about the plants are our teachers, right? Where they had direct communication with plants and they learned from plants, and which was like hard for the Western mind to fully understand. And then you got this guy, Wim Hof, who's talking about the cold is my teacher. And so I'm like, what is this interesting connection with these guys who are literally talking about the elements of nature, whether it's cold water or whether it's air through the breathing exercise, or whether it's through plant alkaloids, that they are literally putting them on a pedestal of that these elements are teachers.
Yeah.
And so that message resonated with me very deeply. A lady walked into my office one day. She goes, "Oh, don't you like that Wim Hof guy?" Because I probably shared it at some point. Well, I just found on Eventbrite or whatever, wherever he was advertising it, he's going to be in LA next weekend, and he's doing this 2-day workshop. I was like, booked, done. Got an Airbnb, took a few days off of work, drove to LA by myself, went to the conference, didn't know anybody, saw these very interesting people that were super open-minded, that were like a balance between like spiritual, because they were like yogis, but they were also like really interested in the science. And then Wim Hof had some scientists kind of speak at his event. So they're like talking about the science and the studies. And then Wim's message is usually very inspirational, very, he's more like in his body, he's not so much in his head.
And the community piece helped you too, to be fueled that, oh, there's other people that are
super
on this
cool
path.
people. I was like, I like hanging out with these people. These are like my kind of people. I enjoy them. And they were healthy looking and like vibrant and
open,
curious. And so I had the best 2 days. It was just like a solo trip, seminar trip, met some interesting people at the event, went out to dinner that night, had fascinating conversations, made some really good friends, hung out in LA for like 3 or 4 days, and then drove back to Phoenix. And on my way back to Phoenix, I said, I'm ready to leave my career. I'm ready to leave the university, and I'm going to go all in, and I'm going to go through Wim Hof's instructor course, and I become a Wim Hof instructor, and I'm going to teach this seminar with my own twist in the United States and maybe abroad. And I'm going to do that for a living.
Cool.
I'm going to go and become an instructor, and I'm going to teach because of that teaching element. And I'm not going to have to be in the office 5 days a week.
Did that light bulb go off, the teaching part coming back then, or not quite yet?
Not quite yet.
Yeah, but you were already being guided on that path.
I was already being guided on that path. And then I went through the program. I left the job, and there's a whole story there, but I left in a very good way, and they set me up in a really good way where I was able to get paid for a period of time while I was not working, and it just worked out beautifully. Like everything fell into place very nicely. I passed down the opportunity to compete to become the vice president at the time. I was okay with it. I was at peace with it. My only fear now was money. So I was the next chapter of like, okay, entrepreneurship is scary. I'm so used to getting paid every 2 weeks for my entire life. I'm just like corporate job, military work, like benefits, health insurance, like all the things,
Yeah.
right?
It's like a little golden handcuffs.
Oh, totally golden handcuffs. And so
Mhm.
that was my next element of like elevation, of like learning how to be an entrepreneur and learning how to, yeah, just break away from the system of corporate work. And then sure enough, I became an instructor. I had very good outcomes. So like very early on, my classes were being filled. I spent time with Wim Hof in Oregon. We did our master's course in Mount Hood, Oregon. I met with instructors from all over the world. I made some of the best friends, so like people I'm really close with to this day.
Mhm.
Very interesting people. Um, Pilots, SEALs, yogis, scientists, like such an interesting collective group of people. And then sure enough, I just became very rooted in that community and was teaching locally
Mhm.
and was having really good outcomes with workshops, and people were coming.
That's when I met you, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I was teaching, and sure enough, I was like building this amazing community here in Phoenix, and
Mhm.
everyone's like, "What's next?" Like, we did your workshop, we did the ice bath, we learned the breathing, we feel amazing,
Yeah.
and like what's next for us? And I'm like, damn, like I don't really have anything next. I guess I could make some retreats, or, they had an advanced course at the time. So I would do the advanced course every now and then. But I'm like, why don't we develop a place where people can go every single day
Yeah.
and have access to all these amazing people and the music
Yeah.
and the
Where it's not your yard.
therapies, where it's not my yard or a rented space.
Yeah.
And so Jesse and I, who's my current business partner now, who you also know, he was also a Wim Hof instructor, and we started around the same time. We just decided to join forces and put our money together and basically create the process that we have now, which was like kind of the first in the valley,
Mhm.
one of the first really in the country of what we're doing. And we decided to open up Optimize
Yeah.
and have a place where people could come every day and practice breath work, do
Mhm.
cold plunge, do sauna. We added stuff like red light and compression and PEMF therapy and biocharger. And we just started adding elements
Mhm.
as we learned. And then that kind of took me more into the biohacking world, and once again, bridging science with
Yeah.
nature.
Like
Because,
optimizing, which is
yeah,
what the name of your
and
company
that's
is.
really what biohacking is in most
Mhm.
cases. It's really just most of these technologies and therapies are just mimicking nature.
Yeah.
Red light therapy is mimicking the sun.
Yeah.
Cold plunge is mimicking a cold river. A sauna is mimicking essentially a
Mhm.
sweat tent, sweat lodge, temescal, which traditional indigenous cultures were using heat elements. Breathwork was very common in India and Eastern philosophy in Asia, and so they had been practicing that for many years. That was not new to humanity by any means.
Yeah.
Even the Wim Hof method is really rooted in tumo breathing,
So
which
you're
comes
you're
from the
just bringing
Himalayas.
it to one place with community and the option for people in these concrete jungles to have access to nature. You're bringing nature to the concrete jungle with community.
Yeah, convenience. One of the things that we have to solve in today's culture is that we live in a very busy time. So we are super busy, 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 right? Think
Mhm.
about it. I'm not that old. I'll be 46 in a few weeks. And I remember the days where people would call you and like you just weren't home. And
Yeah.
like that was like not a big deal. And you just like called them the next day
Yeah.
and you left a call in the answering machine. And that was the pace of life,
Yeah.
right? And very nice pace of life that I kind of miss
Yeah.
in many days.
Mhm.
I've been watching some old movies lately, and I'm like, oh my God, look how present everybody is with the movie, because nobody had their phone. Like if you had a party, I've been watching like these shows from like the 1800s and whatnot. Like when you went to gather with people, there was nobody off in the corner or like answering questions from work. Work's texting you and you're like responding to work, but you're
Mhm.
supposed to be present at this gathering. And so like half the people are actually present and the other half of people are not present because they're either responding to other people or trying to capture the moment with their phone, or they're having a call outside dealing with something else. Like people would gather and everyone was fully there.
Yeah.
And there's just something about people being fully there that you just don't find in today's culture. No one's fully there.
Yeah.
Everybody's half in.
Yeah.
They're half trying to catch up on who they need to respond to,
Yeah.
whether it's through Instagram or any sort of messaging app.
Mhm.
and then they're like half in the conversation and present with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's a big part of what's like affecting our mental health in today's society,
Yeah.
is that it's very hard to be present in the culture that we've created
Yeah. And
because
it's
everybody's
driven, it's
half in.
incentivized, it's an attention economy. So it's really a war on attention.
Right.
Not to say a grand overarching conspiracy, but it is a weapon of mass distraction.
Right. The amount of people that I have to interact with and follow up with on a daily basis
Mm-hmm.
through WhatsApp, groups that I've been added to, Instagram, Facebook every now and then if I get on there. I manage like 4 different email accounts. It's like overwhelming the amount of people that we're actually touching base with every
Yeah.
day. If I compare that to 2001, I just communicated with the people
Yeah.
who maybe I made a few phone calls that day and called my
Sure.
family. Maybe I talked to obviously my colleagues at work for the day.
Yeah.
And maybe at that time, if I was going out on a date and I met with somebody that evening for a drink,
Mm-hmm.
like maybe I chatted with 10 people that day. Or,
No, yeah, now we have to double down on things like float tanks or the counterbalancing practices, going to your center, sitting in a sauna for 20 minutes mindfully, breathwork techniques. It's like we have to adapt to the environment, which is to counterbalance it, the yin,
right,
the slowing down
slowing
piece.
down piece.
Yeah. And not to say this is incredible. It's why you and I are going to be able to have this conversation and someone from some other country can listen.
Right.
Love it.
Yeah.
But it's
A lot
like,
of
okay,
pros.
EMF exposure, there's infinite things we could pay attention to that are bad, but it's also like start first with being grateful for the fact that we're here. We're
Right.
a part of it. We're very resilient, adaptable beings, which is Wim Hof's method.
Right.
And you're very adaptable and you're capable of constantly upgrade. You're able to upgrade consciousness, you know, and it's interesting, but we have to go back to the basics. It's like nature knows. Get your feet on the grass, get out in the morning, get your sun.
Right.
It's so simple.
So
Most of it's
simple.
free, safe, effective, and simple, right?
Right. Most of it is really simple, and it's almost like too good to be true. So people have a hard time digesting it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't overemphasize the amount of people that we stay in touch with and the amount of strangers that we interact with that we just don't even know, but it's taking our energy because we're like responding and giving in some sort of way. And I
Mm-hmm.
think it's shaping our culture in a very strange way. There's definitely pros and cons to it,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also people of leaving very energy deprived. And so they're trying to get back that energy through energy drinks and coffee and
Mm-hmm.
other modalities, uppers of some kind. And I mean, there's a whole, we
Yeah.
can get into so many different things about the blue light and how that affects us, of course, and the
Yeah.
screens and the pulsing lights. And
I'd love to ask you about the shadow side of psychedelics because we got into the beautiful element and how now we're seeing this renaissance happening and everyone's jumping in and there's even more of a structured way it's being deployed, if you want to call it that, to where everyone's hyping them, but not talking about what could go wrong or what.
right,
And you're seeing a lot of people just getting super distracted and checking off boxes and filling up their passport. And
right,
it's not working out real well for a lot
right,
of people because we've talked about how it can look if you do it in a balanced approach and you have the nervous system and all of the prerequisites to have had
right,
come out the other side and integrated it, and now you're a functioning member of society, you're adding value, you're serving others, you're present.
right.
How lucky. But what are you seeing going wrong with some of the psychedelic stuff and and then we'll go into like some of the stuff going wrong with the super optimization stuff where
Mm,
people are stressed out chasing more and more self-help
right.
instead of like, dude, that's its own trap too.
It's a trap too.
So
Yeah.
let's talk to those two dimensions.
So psychedelics, I see the challenge in the psychedelic community where one, it becomes a business. And so the business element is like a slippery slope. And so if you are somebody that's offering psychedelics in a way of business, it really becomes a difficult road to navigate because you have healing that essentially is coming out of the opportunities that they're being put through. But there's also like this drive to basically create more customers. And so when I used to sit in ayahuasca ceremonies, I I found it very familiar. I like to call myself very early on it. There was a point where I was like a seminar junkie. I was like going to all the seminars because I was in like consuming information and learning. And I would find that I would get like really jazzed up, during the seminar. And then sometimes on Monday morning, I would be back to like the same old habits that
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't executing. So really it was the failure of action. And action is really where the power is. I mean, it's so easy to have an idea. Everyone has ideas.
Yeah.
People text me all the time their ideas. I'm like, ideas are great, but if you don't have the ability to put them into action and like
Execute it.
get them moving,
Mm-hmm.
like it's just nothing,
Yeah.
it's just really just a thought in the sky.
And it's like information diet. You're just consuming, but you're not fasting
No.
and you're not digesting and
Right.
processing, or the same idea.
And you're going to get taken off track. So even if you have this great idea and you put it into action, something's going to like move you off track. Like, do you have the ability to like roll with the punches and keep moving forward? Like, that's where a lot of people get lost too. Like, a lot of people get stuck in analysis paralysis. But back to the seminar junkies, you find that like Monday or Tuesday morning after you're done kind of like getting all jazzed up from the seminar, you're just not making the changes, the integration to actually put into play to have real change and real development.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that in the same in the psychedelic community. It was like, oh wait, you're back. Like, how many ceremonies have you done? Like, just keep
Mm-hmm.
coming back. They're still working on the same thing. They are very open about what habits they're trying to change, and then you just kind of see them doing the same habits, on Tuesday morning. And so it becomes, I used to call them ceremony junkies.
Yeah.
So it's like seminar junkies,
Yeah.
ceremony junkies. Like
Bliss junkies.
yeah, you get super
Mm-hmm.
jazzed up over the weekend. You do the ceremony, you go on the trip, you're like a new person. You're talking about it on Instagram on how you had such transformation. And then it's like, oh, wait, you're still showing up like as a, like greedy or lustful or all of the basic stuff. It's like you're not actually emulating this new person. You're just like talking
Mm-hmm.
about the new person.
Like virtue signaling.
Yeah, but you're not actually
Mm.
being that person. And so that's where I see a lot of problems in those communities. So I know that a lot of the communities are trying to really dial in on integration, how to get people into better habits, and there seems to be a lot of good movement on that. Um, so I think that's a big part of it. Also, just like, you can do a lot of journeys and you can get a lot from those journeys, but like the work is really here, like here on the earth, and we chose to be here on the earth. And, um, I just really believe in like, how are you showing up every single day? Like, I don't care how much work you've done if you still are not kind to people and you're trying to like push and shove and kick and crawl over people to get ahead, or you're still constantly looking for validation, or if you're just like analytical and impulsive, and that's like the way you're operating like from here, and you're not operating from here. I'm almost
Mm-hmm.
like, you didn't get the message, like you didn't really get the message. Like, you're still operating from a place of logic, you know, logic on everything, And so I believe the real work is in coming from a place from the heart. You're approaching things from a heart-centered place, and having really good intentions with all of your interactions, and you have humor, and you are humble, and all of those signs I look for, and I really like see, oh wow, this person has really made a lot of development. So I think people could get really lost in that.
Mm-hmm.
um, what else in the psychedelics? I mean, there's all kinds of different issues that deal with. I mean, you have these native people who are in Peru, and it's a big business for them as well now. And so you have all these Westerners coming from all over the world, and they're going down there to have these experiences. And there's been lots of issues in those communities with women, right, and vulnerability, and people taking advantage. So there's that element that's probably still a problem, although I'm not so connected anymore like I used to be. Um, and then you just like, you're just like escaping reality too,
Mm-hmm.
like
Yeah.
constant escape. You're escaping reality, and so you're not showing up and doing the work. And it's like, okay, is your life actually improving? Like, are you creating systems in your life? Are you of service to others? Like what are you actually creating, or are you just disassociating? And so there's like, there needs to be a balance. Like, if
Yeah.
you're going to go like journey and learn and process, like come back and create something beautiful, like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
get something moving, collectively, if everybody's conscious and creating something beautiful, like things are, the world as a whole, like is moving in a very good direction,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I say that those are the main things that I see in the psychedelic community.
And we touched a little bit on the vulnerability, how powerful it was for you to realize the power and vulnerability. But then you start to see the commodification and marketing of it.
Oh, so
And we,
much marketing of
yeah, and
it.
that's something that's problematic right now.
Oh yeah, and also I always got to remind people, because I'm in the community of like health and wellness and helping people on their journeys. It's like, stop ruminating about your ailments, and so constant rumination
Yeah.
about you're on your healing journey forever. It's
You're
like,
identifying with it.
yeah, you're identifying with it, and in some way it's serving a purpose for you, and it's maybe allowing you to get away with certain stuff of not being a productive person in society, because you're constantly on your healing journey.
Mm,
And so that's like a trap
yeah.
that I think is also part of the tension myoneural syndrome, because you're constantly ruminating about your ailment
Yeah.
and your chronic illness and your issues
Mm-hmm.
and your trauma. And so I think there has to be a part where it's like you don't identify so strongly with that. So I think you have to be really careful about the words that you use.
Yeah.
And people are not sometimes so careful. And of course, I've made the mistake
Yeah.
too of identifying with certain conditions or identifying with certain ways, like, oh, I'm ADHD or I'm this,
Mm-hmm.
putting these labels
Yeah.
on your body or on yourself. And so I think there's a big issue with that as well. So I think it's really important not to ruminate. I think it's good to process and go through periods of time where you're maybe working through some stuff, and you might be, um, a little bit more disconnected from social gatherings and whatnot, which is, I think, healthy and good for people at times. But eventually, you want to be able to move past that. But yeah, back to your original question, people are really identify with. Yeah, I think men have gotten hit with this quite a bit, where it's like, men have traditionally always been known to be like not vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I think women as a whole are trying to get men to like be more vulnerable so that they can probably feel heard a little bit more, because women are tend to be more vulnerable, more emotional, more open in many ways. They process things emotionally very different than us. And so there's been this movement of men becoming more vulnerable, which I think is really good work. But there's also this element of like
Marketing it
marketing it, oversharing it, identifying with it,
or false vulnerability to present vulnerability,
false vulnerability to prevent. Yeah, exactly. You've just like,
or the filming, like we said, of workshops where people are being shown in their most vulnerable states,
yeah,
crying and screaming, which is like, it happens.
right,
But is that now everyone's expecting that when they go to a
right,
workshop, or they're presenting as that to get the
right.
likes? So there's a whole mix of things with social media
Oh,
creating
yeah.
this new phenomena, isn't there?
Oh, yeah. And it's creating like these super egos,
Mm-hmm. So do
and
psychedelics.
oh yeah, where it's like, I know more than you. I'm more
Mm-hmm.
conscious than you. I'm more enlightened than you. There's
Yeah.
an element of that, but the vulnerability thing is strange, and I really am attracted to like stoicism, and I believe that emotions are extremely powerful, and you definitely don't want to block emotions or pretend that they don't affect you. But like, how can you process the emotion, feel it through, like understand where it might be coming through, but then harness and channel that energy to be productive
Yeah.
energy or to be of service in some sort of way.
Yeah.
So I really like,
Otherwise, you walk around like a vulnerable child in a society that will eat you up.
it'll eat you alive.
Yeah.
And so I love Marcus Aurelius and meditations and
Yeah.
a lot of his work.
Stoics.
Oh yeah, so powerful. I think it's just like something every young man should be like required to read.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like so important for people to understand that.
Yeah.
And not just men, it's so important for women, because
Yeah.
it'll give them like some opportunity to learn how to process things and channel it for good,
Yeah.
where it just doesn't wreck you, or you have to shield yourself from the world because there's
Mm-hmm.
just like so many things going on. And so there's really a lot for us to understand as human beings, in understanding the emotional body. And, science doesn't really touch on it too much. And so there's really no school for emotions. You just never get the class.
Yeah.
There's no class at the university or grade school, elementary school. So you really just have to figure out
Yeah.
on your own. And I think maybe ancestrally, we probably, these great schools of Greece and whatnot, right? You probably learned more about how to deal with these. It's part of the human experience, right?
Yeah.
You just can't.
And then if you commodify or incentivize vulnerability as the thing that gets you more likes and money, or whatever is incentivizing it, it drives this whole epidemic of it actually takes away from the true vulnerability
Oh yeah,
that's there,
right,
and the true psychedelic experience or the true breathwork workshop or the thing that's like so special about all these things, but then people go, I'm never going to that because I don't
right,
want to be on film,
right.
or it almost ruins it.
It
It's like
does.
a psyop that wasn't intentional. It's almost just the incentives drive it. And social media is a big part of it. That's just this new phenomena that we didn't have.
Right,
So it's almost like a byproduct of attention economy.
right.
It's interesting.
And the young folks coming up with social media and influencers and Instagram, they grew up in that world. I don't come from that world. Everything is about how can I get really famous really fast. I want to skip all the steps. I want to go down to Peru and get the 1 week shaman certificate. I want to put myself in a place of becoming a teacher, even though I haven't really done a lot of the work. Just that old fashioned work ethic of
Yeah.
like really learning something and mastering something and having somebody literally grade you on whether or not you're ready to be put in a place of a teacher, and just like
Mm-hmm.
literally stepping into that role. And then they become the healer and their inflated ego.
Mm.
But there's also something about the vulnerability, just back to that, is the amount of fake crying that I see on social media is an interesting phenomenon that I'm like really trying to understand. And I see it on both sides, men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I just would never think to take out my phone in a moment of processing crying and try to film it so that I can just show people what I'm going through. So like psychologically, I have a hard time really understanding what that is and why people
Mm.
are doing that, and what are they really gaining out of that in some sort of way. But really, I think we all have a really good sensor,
Mm.
and it's that authentic sensor in our body, and so we can really feel when something's like authentic or not.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't trust that, and we'll just like resort to logic
Yeah.
and bypass the feeling. So in my life, I'm really learning how to process things more from my heart, my body, and to trust my intuition and not always resort to logic
Yeah.
and analytics, analytical type of thinking.
Yeah. And to also, it takes a lot of time for me at least, and we saw this during the pandemic, of how easily manipulated we are by the sophisticated technological means of propaganda.
Oh yeah,
And
it's
so, and
strong.
we're hive like people, we're social beings. And so it's really hard to discern what the hive is doing versus what the inner knowing is doing. And that's what you started off the piece of transformation, is creating space, slowing down enough to listen from within. And it ticks off into all of your learning from really good teachers that you got to hand select, and you stop the busyness. And so it's like, if you love somebody, you tell them to like disassociate from the thing for a minute, pull back, create some space and time, which is uncomfortable in the beginning.
Right,
But during the pandemic, it's like what was being happening was fear and all this stuff. And we were hijacked,
right,
and that's what happened in Nazi Germany to a different degree for different reasons. And
sure.
so the easiest way to lose your sovereignty is to actually think about what the hive is doing and
Oh,
think I should go partake.
so powerful. And if you step away from the hive, what are people, how many people I know who did not want to get, the jab, who did not want to go through that process,
But got
but the
coerced into it.
the coercion and the pressure
Or the financial, like
from
your
their
job,
family
or
was like,
yeah.
wait, I'm like, you don't even want to do that, but you're doing it. Yeah. So that's a really powerful motivator for human beings. It's
And
just,
and
it's
the
peer pressure.
and the social sciences and the people that have learned from Nazi Germany, there's an actual whole, the CIA and all these people have learned a lot about the nature of consciousness, and they know how to pull the right tabs and strings now. So more than ever, we have to have discernment and the ability to look
Oh,
within.
so strong. We're getting
So
attacked from multiple areas. You have influencers, you have Hollywood, you have
huge
programming, you
budgets.
have news, you have huge budgets, you have people who are, stars who are now sending a message and you relate to them, so you're going to listen to their message.
Hmm.
It's a mess.
It's
Like if
crazy.
you don't find yourself and get rooted and grounded and strong in your own discernment, like you will get ping ponged around life like crazy.
Yeah.
It is more important than ever to basically find your inner power and inner strength. And
Yeah.
that's why I love, some of the teachers that I mentioned today, the people who came into my life. I'm so grateful for them to
Hmm.
help connect me with that inner strength and lead me towards my own personal power,
Yeah.
and that's one of the main things we're trying to do with Optimize is just empowering others.
Yeah.
Just like if I can help you to take your authority back and even be able to walk into that doctor's office and knowing what you know now and the education you had, the experiences that you have to be able to even ask questions,
Yeah.
like,
Totally.
why do I need that pill? Or what does that pill do? What are the side effects? How does it work? Oh, wait, doesn't sound like it's even going to work that well. Like you have to learn, you have to understand. You cannot take your authority back because then it's just false authority.
Yeah.
If you're not willing to do the work and educate yourself and actually learn, it's just false authority. When you
Hmm.
actually have information and you've done your homework and you've done your research, um, then you have the ability to ask educated questions. And it's like if their responses are not lining up with the information that you've researched,
Yeah.
then you have the ability to change direction and or fire that person and say,
Yeah.
okay, like you're not going to be like the person I want to counsel for my own health care. And so I think a lot of people don't understand, like you have the ability to fire your doctor. They're hired, you hire them for their knowledge and consultation, right? Just like
Hmm.
a lawyer. And so if you're getting advice that's just not in alignment, with what you're trying to accomplish or what you studied or your integrity, whatever it might be, guess what? There are other people you can choose from.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of variety today.
Yeah.
And so now there's a whole movement in the biohacking world where everyone's becoming kind of their own doctor because now you can basically go,
Decentralized
yeah,
thinking.
you can pay $400 or $500 and get like complete blood work, like 100 plus biomarkers, and like you can literally have these like AI um, analysis of your blood work and literally give you information on like
Hmm.
what's going on in your body, like way more thorough than your 10-minute conversation with your doctor, who's
Hmm.
just going to touch on like a handful of things, and then you get to be able to have a better understanding of like really what's going on in your body, and then you get to utilize different types of services and lifestyle changes,
Yeah.
whether it's anti-inflammatory strategies or whether it's like improving muscle mass and strength, or whether it's learning how to down regulate the nervous system because you're like way too sympathetic dominant and you're constantly in fight or flight, and that's like creating a cascade of health
Hmm.
issues, chronic illness, autoimmune disease.
Yeah.
Like you can actually start to really learn to become your own doctor. You have wearables now. You can actually getting daily feedback of how good your sleep is, what your HRV is.
Yeah.
Are you getting deep sleep? Are you getting enough REM sleep? Is your heart rate through the roof when you're trying to sleep? What's your oxygen levels when you're trying to sleep?
Yeah.
So we have a lot of ability to holistically look at ourselves
Yeah.
and get all this data
And coming
and
from
make
a
informed
more,
decisions.
yeah, you have more time than the doctor does. He's got to see a patient every 4 minutes, and he's in medical school. They don't get a whole lot of dietary training, and
Right.
so it's like just starting to pull out of that centralized model and give yourself space to start being curious and think for yourself. And a lot of it's simple, like you said.
Oh, it's so simple.
Maybe eliminating things first
It's so simple.
and getting back to the roots first before adding, which
Right.
is a hedonic treadmill of its own.
Yeah.
But it's like, man, just get the morning sun as a starter, or
Right.
something simple like that in your habits.
Yeah. And when I speak with people who have not necessarily been on their health journey quite yet, but they're just like dabbling and they're just like starting to see things that are resonating with them, everyone's looking for the supplement,
Hmm.
which is like going to like change the game. And
Or the tool.
I'm like, guys, there is no supplement that's just like
Hmm.
going to change the game. It doesn't exist. There's no silver bullet. And the ice bath is not the solution, or there's no
Yeah.
solution. It's a combination of lifestyle effort, how you think, how you process your day, how you go about your day.
Yeah.
Like that is really where all the work is.
Yeah.
And that's really where the magic is as well. The supplements will definitely help and add some of the things that you need.
Yeah.
But I see the same culture that's like hanging on to pharmaceuticals, where it's like, the doctor prescribed me this medicine. I don't know what it's doing. I barely even know what I'm taking. I didn't research it. I don't even know how it interacts with my biology. It just,
Yeah. You
I'm
trust
not a, I'm
authority
not a
again.
doctor.
Yeah.
That's the famous words. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah.
You don't need to be a doctor to understand how the medication works. Like,
Yeah.
if you're putting in your body, it's completely up to you actually to be able to make that decision on whether you think that's going to be helpful or not.
Yeah.
And there's enough information online for you to be able to find the answers.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be a genius to find out.
And question the companies in their incentives, like how corrupt they
Oh,
are, the FDA and all
oh
these. So
man.
do they really look out for your best interest? Is it really medicine, or is it just profit?
Right.
Right? We have to start questioning authority, you know?
Right. And I see people now with supplements in the same way,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, "Oh, I'm not feeling well. I just need this ashwagandha and that's going to change my life." No, actually, what's going to change your life is like your bad habits. It's your negative thinking. It's your self-talk. It's your ability to not disconnect from, things at work. There's so many elements. Like,
Removing
oh
things
man,
first. Yeah.
lifestyle change is hard sell. I'm
Yeah.
in the business of like helping people change their lifestyle, and I don't have any quick fixes for anybody. I have a curated experience, which we call the optimized blueprint, that takes people through compression, infrared sauna, cold plunge, hot tub, red light therapy, and PEMF therapy. And so you go through all of that. There's a lot of crossover of added benefits. You have circulatory benefits, which is extremely important because we're pretty, um, our lifestyle is just like a lot of sitting and
Yeah.
typing, and, it's just not a lot of movement anymore. And
Yeah.
so, like, that is probably one of the biggest issues in society right now,
Yeah.
is sedentary lifestyle.
Yeah.
I would say it's like number one. Like, sedentary lifestyle is the new smoking.
And light.
Light, people, not even most population have no idea
Yeah.
about light.
I know. I
Light,
didn't forever.
most people in the biohacking understand the light element,
Mm-hmm. But the
but
99.9%,
99.9%,
I'm having a hard time. I'm discovering like that no one wants to even talk about it.
no one's talking
I'm like,
about it.
it's so interesting because
Yeah,
it's right here, it's in front of our face, but
no one's talking
we
about
have
it.
near lights on us, so it's healthy lights, even though we have to be inside. But when we're outside, we're in nature.
Right.
It's
I had
huge.
a conversation actually with my sister. I'll share, and she's wakes up really early. She works at the hospital. She's got busy lifestyle, taking care of kids at home, family, all that stuff. And, so she has some sleep issues,
Mm-hmm.
and so she's like, "Hey, like, what's that? What's that supplement? That can, like," she sends me stuff like, "Can this help?" And all that. I'm like, honestly, what's going to help like the most besides the supplement, and like you can dabble with the supplement and see how it helps, is like you really need to block the light before bed.
Yeah.
Like, there's no supplement to do that. It's
Yeah.
like it's a discipline.
Yeah.
It's a matter of putting on the red glasses if you choose to watch TV in the evening. It's about shutting the kitchen light and
Yeah.
just putting on something dimmer, so you're not blaring kitchen light at 9:30 at night,
Yeah.
and then you're looking at a big screen TV, because the TVs are
Yeah.
getting bigger and bigger these
And the
days.
smartphones are on us.
The smartphones are on us, and people aren't realizing that some people are sleeping with Wi-Fi routers in
Yeah.
their bedroom.
Yeah.
It's like 10 feet away from the bed.
And people don't believe that that's harmful because the companies aren't willing to admit to the
Right.
truth.
They can't admit to it. They'll
They
be open
can't.
up to too many
Yeah.
lawsuits, so they're protecting themselves. And then I have some people who literally sleep with their cell phone on their bed next to their head,
Mm.
because, that's what they use for their alarm for work. So it's like they want to be close to it to shut the alarm off. And
Yeah.
I get it.
Because people don't know EMF exposure exists.
The EMF exposure, the blue light. And so basically I told my sister, I'm like, listen, you really want to change like your sleep pattern, you need to dim all the lights at nighttime. If you like really want to take it up a notch, like get red lights, of course, change them to a red setting in the evening. And if you're going to watch TV, for the last hour and a half or 2 hours of your day, which is fine. I understand people, like, there's healthy disassociation too. I enjoy that. Put on the red glasses, because if you are just getting blasted by blue light and you're not producing melatonin and your body's not getting drowsy, and melatonin is not just important for getting you drowsy and helping you fall asleep, but it's also like a very important antioxidant that's doing a lot of work
Mm-hmm.
in your system as well. You're not getting quality sleep. You might be falling asleep.
Yeah, you're just knocked out.
You're just knocked out. You're not getting quality sleep. And then you're chasing, because the next day, a lot of people I think are in this, you're just like tired and lethargic. And now you're just trying to do anything to boost your energy, whether it's the energy drink pandemic within its own, which is
Mm.
like really a big problem.
And vape pens, and just that's why I think of Huxley a lot. I think of the Soma, and he talked about that in Brave New World, and he sort of predicted in the future that people would give their sovereignty over to quick feeling good things. And so Soma was this idea of a drug, but it was basically the idea of smartphones, vape pens, microdosing, feel good, feel good, feel good. Now I don't have to feel bad ever, which is what creates change.
Right.
When you feel not at ease, which
Right.
drove the transformation in your life, right? And you had to create space to feel. And I'm always thinking, like, if we just keep microdosing and giving people weed and vape pens and endless distractions, smartphones, TikTok, you're never going to get off the hedonic treadmill. And now the devil's chessboard up here, the people that want to run amok will run amok. And there is no active change, no political change, no cultural change, no transformation of the individual. So I really do think that we're in the middle of Huxley's Brave New World
Mm-hmm.
and the tyrannical forces. And it's not some grand conspiracy, but it just makes sense. The people that want to be the psychopath, sociopath manipulators, we saw it during the pandemic, for all different incentives, have way more access because all they got to do is distract the masses,
Yeah.
right? It's
Distraction is very
interesting.
easy today.
It's very
Yeah.
easy,
Yeah. It's
more than
very easy.
ever.
More than
So
ever.
now it takes counterbalance measures at an exponential rate. We have to really work hard to go and counterbalance that exponential tech.
Right. And I'm just like amazed on, I just was reflecting about this recently. I'm like, the amount of people I'm interacting with on a daily basis compared to 20 years ago is like quadruple.
Yeah.
And most of the people are actually strangers, and and to think that it's not affecting our nervous system, all of these alerts and red receipts and this
Hmm. And our filters of how we communicate.
yeah.
You can't just have it, and then now everybody's it's been created this way, socially engineered this way to where everyone's divided and righteous.
Mm,
So if I have an opinion, a political opinion, or an idea, we can't just argue anymore and have a disagreement. No, I'm in a camp. I'm on a
mhm.
red team or a blue team.
Yeah.
So ideological righteousness has actually been pitted against ourselves. And I think that's a quick way to break down communities, family units, all that. So it's an interesting time. We need to learn how to disagree more and be uncomfortable. It's okay to be uncomfortable and not be
Yes.
so offended, right?
Not be so offended.
And I think if you're offended, you should look within.
Right.
If you say something I don't like, that's my problem. It's like, whose problem is that? Shouldn't I be
That's
able to
true.
have Mike sit here and tell me something I don't like? That's him.
Right.
You're holding a field of perceptual information, and it shouldn't match up to mine. And if I don't align with it, that's great. That's how we get somewhere.
Right.
I don't want to talk to people that think like me. I like to be always butting up against ideas. A lot of the books I read, I don't agree with at all, actually.
And we live in triggered nation. And
Totally.
so one of the missing elements of our education system is learning how to get people to adapt and react to stress in a healthy way.
Yeah.
And so we're going from like 0 to 100 because we're offended by something,
Hmm.
and we just don't have the principles and tools to learn how to work with stress in a healthy way. And stress also is conceived as this very bad thing, but it's actually very necessary and
Yeah.
actually very important, very good for us when used in a good way. The term hormesis
Hmm.
comes to mind, or good stress. And we're avoiding stress in many areas of our life because we're seeking comfort.
Hmm.
And that, what I would say, was one of the big messages that Wim Hof talked about that resonated with me,
Hmm.
is our addiction to comfort has made us as a society very weak
Yeah.
and very triggered. And whether that be climate stress, with just temperature, oh, I'm a little chilly, I need to turn on the heat, or if it's too
Yeah.
hot, I need to turn on the AC, or it's too far to walk, it's 4 blocks away.
Yeah.
We're really avoiding stress at all elements. But then when something stressful happens to us, we're not able to actually work or deal with that in a
Yeah.
healthy way.
Right.
And so that creates impulsive behavior, that creates all kinds of different issues that really create more division and create more problems in your community and relationship,
Yeah,
you know?
I agree completely. We've created a coddle culture,
Yes.
and it's dangerous.
And I think it's changing now.
Yeah,
I see
the
winds.
pendulum is
It's
swinging.
swinging.
Yeah,
I see things changing in a good direction. I'm very optimistic. I feel really good about the direction of the country right
totally.
now, which is also having a ripple effect on the direction of the globe.
Hmm.
And I'm very optimistic about health and truth. And
People are seeing through deception too, and seeing like,
oh
okay,
yeah,
so all the corruption's being exposed, and maybe you feel helpless, but it's not helpless because on the individual level, you're willing to have deep
right.
conversations, make change. We're in a good time to be alive, an
And I
interesting time.
And I saw that change very drastically when we had the conflict in Syria, and then, of course, the conflict in Ukraine,
Hmm.
and also the conflict in Israel and Palestine. Coming from the military, one of the things that I was all gung ho about was like, if they mess with us or any of our allies, like, let's go to war, send more troops, send more planes, send more money, send more.
Yeah,
And that was like the energy, and all of these Hollywood movies were glorifying war and glorifying
the war
uh,
machine.
the war machine. And it was just like everyone was so jazzed up. It's like, all right, who's next? Who wants to
Hmm.
mess with America next? And that was the culture that I was a part of and supported. And then I got very anti-war when I started to really research like who's actually profiting from war. And I became like a big fan of Ron Paul at the time in like 2012, and really like resonated with his message and so many different things. And so then my friends started to really distance, like, oh, what's up with this guy? You like anti-America now because you don't want to go to war? I'm like, I have seen what war does. I have seen people with their legs blown off.
Yeah.
I've raised money. I drove on a motorcycle with 50 people from Arizona to Balboa Hospital in San Diego, and we raised money and provided services and donations for military members, all young men that were coming out of Afghanistan and Iraq, and they were basically now living at Balboa Hospital because they're out processing because they can no longer be in the military. They're blind, they're missing limbs, they're like in a terrible situation. Their life has changed dramatically, and I spent time with these young men, and I'm so blessed that I went to war, and I didn't come back physically harmed.
Yeah.
I came back with like mental issues, and so that's not even talking about the mental issues that they might be facing.
Yeah.
Of course, that they have this whole new lifestyle, and it deeply resonated with me. Like, man, these guys' lives are changed forever,
Hmm.
and like, what did we really accomplish in Afghanistan and Iraq? Like
Vietnam. You look at all the wars.
Vietnam, all of them, like, what have we really accomplished? And like, who actually made out from these wars? Who actually is like doing better?
Yeah.
It's not the soldiers.
Right.
It's not the Marines. It's not the Navy. It's not the Air Force.
Yeah.
It is not the military who is like doing well from this war.
Mm-mm.
So we're like being like used. I felt very used in many ways. And
That's where a lot of the real PTSD comes from.
I was
Is the
really upset
reckoning
about
with
it.
the truth about why you were over. A lot of veterans have had to go through
Right.
this transformation of, wow, I went over there, and then they find out about 9/11, and no one wants to really truly look under the hood.
Right.
And that's painful.
Or the weapons of mass destruction,
Yeah,
right? Which we
exactly.
all know is the big lie.
Hmm.
And so like I'm very proud of everyone who rolled up their sleeves and went overseas and like put themselves in a vulnerable position. And I know when you're in the fight, you're really looking after like who's the guy next to me, and making sure that we get home tonight and get back. And if you're a leader in that situation, it's like, how can I get my troops back home with their families when this deployment is done? And, I felt very used after I started really learning about the profit of war. And I went down the rabbit holes of Rothschilds funding both wars
Hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. But I saw a dramatic change when the Syria conflict happened, the Ukraine conflict happened, and then, of course, the Israel conflict happened. And the big change that I saw was a lot of military guys that I knew, veterans, active duty, they were not all gung ho about let's go carpet bomb Syria, let's go carpet bomb
Mm.
Ukraine and pick a war with Russia, let's go carpet bomb and get involved in that conflict. People are just like,
Mm.
no,
Yeah.
like you guys need to figure your shit out, and you guys need to like solve your own problems,
Yeah.
and we're not going to be like ready for war. But if you can tell, the news networks were trying to get us all riled up.
Sure. And they're dying.
They were working so hard to get us
Hmm.
involved in these conflicts, working so hard to get the buy-in of the American people to go. Because think about Iraq, that situation. The news networks were spinning it, weapons of mass destruction and this and that. And everyone was like, okay, we're in Afghanistan right now. What's next?
Yeah.
Iraq? All right, let's go. You know, if Korea would have popped off, I was actually in Korea during this time. And there was actually a threat of a third front of battle at the time. We were already in Afghanistan. I had served in Operation Enduring Freedom. I spent about 8 months in that conflict. 2023, the Iraq conflict kicked off. We deployed for that. They moved our battle group to Korea because Kim Jong-un at the time was launching missiles,
Wow.
and he was testing, and there was all this talk about him gaining access to a nuclear weapon. And so we were actually planning on a strike on like how to deal with this conflict if he invaded South Korea. So we would
Wow.
have had war on 3 different fronts. And then who knows who else would have got involved, right? Because
Right.
it's very close to Russia. And then, of course, you have Iran, you know, in that territory. So you could have really created a World War III
Yeah.
at that time. And we were very, very close. But everybody was so gung ho about it. And yeah, so I have noticed the pendulum swing
Hmm.
in a direction where people really want peace.
Yeah.
Like peace is very important,
And
and
truth.
yeah, peace and truth, and ridding the world of the fire starters, the agencies internally and externally that literally are starting fires all
Yeah.
the time,
That's
and then
right.
profiting in some sort of way.
That's huge. Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's a whole can of worms we could go into for 3 hours. But
right,
that's, yeah, I believe you. I think the same thing's happening. The mainstream media outlets are dead. Nobody trusts them anymore. People are starting to just question the fact that like maybe our own government does have nefarious actors within.
right,
So it's nice to see.
right.
And yeah, this has been really fun, dude. I was going to ask you if you were going to die today and you didn't have anything out there on social media from the past, what would you want to share with the world?
Hmm. So if I was to die today, what would I want to share with the world? Like in like a last communication.
Yeah, they're going to hear this recording. Somebody's going to hear it. If you had to just record this conversation and say something.
Well, there's a couple of founding principles that I like try to live my life by, and it has really helped me, and really I see like a lot of truth in it. And it's not the easy way, but it is a way. Like one of the things I think we're all chasing is happiness in many ways. Like we all just want to feel good. Like we have these snippets in our lives that we look back and we're like, oh man, what a happy moment or happy time period I had in my life. And and then the rest of the days are just kind of mundane, and you know you have your highs and lows. But what I really found in a lot of the work that I've done getting to this point, and I have a lot more to learn. You know, I'm still a student for life by many means here. And what I have found to be kind of like a universal truth is that discipline is the key to happiness. Discipline and service to others is the key to happiness. So it's like if you're really not feeling happy at your life right now, and you're really feeling down and depressed, and you feel like you don't have any passion, find areas of your life where you can have more discipline.
Mm,
And it might be like really simple things like waking up and having a very simple routine of like drinking a glass of water that has salt and lemon and apple cider vinegar. And I go outside and I put my feet in the grass and I do, you know, a couple of push-ups and squats, or say some sort of mantra or prayer, or do a breathwork exercise. But I basically take this short period of time in my day, and I do that before I engage in all the other activities of my day. So I think discipline is like one of the keys to happiness. So find areas of your life where you need more discipline and start making slight modifications, and you'll start to feel good. And
mm,
the reason why you feel good is because you're following through with what your word is. And when you follow through with your word, that's really powerful. When you say what you're going to do and you follow through and you do it, you feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be so simple, and then it could build from that. And the service to others is extremely important. It's written in all the religious texts. No matter where you look, you will always find that being of service to others being such an important element. And I never really paid no attention to that. And then when I started to actually be of service to others and think about my work and how I'm showing up and how that's affecting the people around me, I saw that as a very, very powerful way to navigate this human existence. And so not just be of service to others so other people can see and pat you on the back, but literally just try to make people feel a little bit better, even if it's in daily interactions and even if you never share it to anybody at all. But every single day you have all of these touch points in traffic, in the store, to just be warm and welcome and give people just a little lift to their day in any sort of way, or just make yourself available to be of service, even it might be not what you had in store for that day, I think is extremely important. And universally, karmically, like, the universe will reward you. And so if we're all operating in that sort of way, that raises the collection of consciousness and humanity, and just makes the world a better place. And I really believe that. And so I do my best to try to sprinkle, that every day in the life with all of my interactions and give people my authentic present attention. And sometimes that is just enough in itself. When we're living in a world, we're just moving to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just not necessarily having that deep connection.
Dude, I love it. And you're doing it. So
thank
that's
you.
why I appreciate you. I'm
I
glad
appreciate
I know
you too.
you. Yeah.
Same here, man. Thank you for having me. And
absolutely. I
having
want to
this.
expose you to more people, and it's nice to share your essence in this way. So, and it's been fun to learn about your story a little deeper too. So
Cool.
yeah, thanks, brother.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate you, man.
Absolutely. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.